Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're going to try to get started here. Okay. Good morning. It's great to see everybody back. I think yesterday we had a great morning of sessions. And for those of you, I don't know if everybody here attended last night's dinner, but it was a big hit. Great dinner last night. After dinner, we had some lively entertainment, and we had a hypnotist, and it was. I don't think I've laughed that hard in a long time. It was a good time, and I want to thank all the volunteers that volunteered to come up and participate. Everybody was a really good sport. It was a lot of fun for everybody. We also had Taylor Swift made a guest appearance. And to really cap the evening off last night, I think the most impressive thing was, and I always say it's probably the most precious thing that we do here when we have this convention is we always have a group that we're going to donate. And yesterday we had the Four Diamonds Fund, so from Hershey Hotel over there, and this group right here, just how generous this mutual group is. We raised $25,000 just by passing a basket around. So that was just thank you so much for your generosity. We have a great agenda today. I tell you what, and if you're a president, CNO, manager, I mean the topics we have this morning in store for you are things that keep us all up at night. And I think we're looking forward to hearing some really good experts. So we're going to listen to the 2020 industry results last year and what a challenging year it was last year. We will hear about that. We're going to hear about risk-based pricing. We're going to hear about ESG. We're going to hear about weather risk and climate change and just the volatility around the weather losses. We're going to hear about the economy and investment markets, labor market conditions, evolution of fiscal and monetary policy, inflation trends. So a lot of great topics today, so we're looking really forward to it. I have the pleasure of introducing our very first presenter, Sean Kevlin. And Sean is the President and Chief Executive Officer at the Insurance Institute, or Insurance Information Institute, so triple I. He was named CEO and President in August 2016. And Sean comes with a really good, impressive background. He was group head of public affairs for Zurich Insurance Group. He worked for Citigroup as head of strategic communications. He worked in the public sector. He worked as a political appointee in the President Bush administration as a senior advisor on the tax policy. He was a press secretary for the White House Office of Management and Budget. He worked in the private sector, and he worked for a public affairs firm, prestigious Edelman & Hill in Knowlton. Sean is a graduate of the University of Colorado at Boulder. He and his wife, Annick, have 3 children. He is an avid enthusiast of exercise and outdoors, and participating regularly in triathlons and other sporting events. So if you can please help me welcome Sean Kevlin.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. I think I've got to take that last sentence off my bio now that I've got 3 kids under 7. I'm trying to remember the last time I did a triathlon. This one. All right, I'm going to set up here. Which made for an interesting COVID, too, finding a quiet spot in a little row house in Georgetown with 3 children, 7 and under. I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff that we went through during COVID as an industry. The Insurance Information Institute, if you're not familiar with us, we're a mission-driven organization. We're a nonprofit. We're 60 years old. We were founded by the carriers of the industry. It's really unique, and I'll point out a lot of these types of organizations like ours in the insurance industry where we are trying to be mission-driven and trying to provide a societal good. So we try to provide data-driven insights on insurance We seek to inform and empower consumers in our industry to better understand insurance and risk management. We're all about empowerment. What we also seek is a world of more insurance. Bringing insurance into an industry, we'll talk a little bit about some of the data that we've done. We've been able to prove at III that more insured communities recover faster. So we do aim to close that protection gap that we're all pretty familiar with. One of the things we talk about a lot is this disruption continuum. Disruption's been a bit of a buzzword of late, but this is actually what insurance does, right? We look at what's happening in society and how to manage that risk. 2 years ago, there were 4 boxes on this screen. We've had to add, of course, you've got natural catastrophes, you've got the economic volatility, political risk, technology, the 4th industrial revolution, the combination of cyber and human coming together. And then the last 2 years, we're experiencing COVID, and we're also experiencing a significant amount of civil unrest, especially in our country. So we have a bigger disruption continuum, but I would argue this industry has been around for 300 years for a reason, because we know disruption, we know how to manage risk. And I think coming out of COVID, we'll be looking at different ways that we did, in fact, manage and led through this disruptive phase. It's interesting in insurance as well, as I think we manage and measure success a little differently as an industry. We recover economies. We are financial first responders. As soon as the government gets in and saves and the floodwaters go away, we are there recovering the economy. We seek to have better community well-being. Our organization was set up, again, to inform consumers about insurance. If you look at some of the other organizations that we have, the IIHS, again, insurance-backed organization, what they've done for traffic safety. Arguably, every auto manufacturer shakes in their boots when they find out IIHS is testing one of their vehicles. So we do a lot for community well-being. We protect capital. I'll talk a little bit about how we protect that capital and keep it on hand and how we withstand your traditional economic ups and downs that happen. Resilience is a big thing, especially as the changes that we're seeing right now with climate. I know Steve, our next speaker, is going to talk even more about the changes we're seeing with climate and what's happening. And then as well as an industry, we're really coming together on fairness and equality. And how do we have an industry where our talent reflects the communities where we work and serve? How do we make sure that we're informing people about what fairness means in terms of pricing? These are big issues that we're trying to pay attention to and make sure people understand what insurance is doing for all of them. So going in and reflecting on COVID and what happened in the industry, it's a nice story to tell. This industry really stepped up. Charitable giving was up, nearly $300 million in charitable giving that we gave to the communities. We stepped up and gave auto insurance premiums back. Nearly over $14 billion in auto insurance premiums were returned to consumers. We were hiring people through COVID-19. And still are. Every sector of the industry, property casualty, agents and brokers, life, health, all of those in insurance were hiring and are still hiring and even committed to keep people hired. And then finally, what we did as an industry is we stepped up in our innovation, right? As people were working at home, as all of this was happening, did not mean the catastrophes stopped as well. And so we were able to remotely ensure and keep our promises as an industry all throughout that disruption of COVID. One of the things at III that came very, very pronounced is we needed to explain why a pandemic is largely an uninsurable event. So if you look at 9/11, 9/11 was felt by everyone in this country and around the world, but primarily 2 economies were impacted, New York City and Washington, D.C. So not even the entire state of New York, but primarily from an economic standpoint. But when you look at what happened in the pandemic, you've got nearly every economy in this country and around the world that is impacted at the same time. So that law of large numbers that our industry bases itself on is impossible. You just simply can't underwrite this risk. That wasn't what the trial attorneys wanted to believe, or at least our customers, right? And one of the things that we say is, well, who could have predicted this pandemic? Insurance actually predicted it, because the policies that we write had many exclusions. So beyond also, the fact that a business insurance policy needs physical damage, which a virus doesn't project, we also clarified it through exclusions in our policies. Nonetheless, we had trial attorneys that were convincing customers that they should file legal claims. And so you're seeing here a spike in the filings of legal claims, in particular in the food industry. We had celebrity chefs out there meeting with our president, telling him that the claims needed to be paid. Lots and lots of news going on about this. Lots of potential danger for our industry. In fact, they were able to also convince legislators that we should start thinking about retroactively writing contracts, which in our own economic analysis at III proved you would have bankrupted this industry in a matter of months if you did business insurance policies broadly, or if you just did business interruption. So we had some actual concern on our hands. And one thing we did at III was we set up a campaign, The Future of American Insurance and Reinsurance, and you can go there now. It's fairinsure.org. And we had to aggressively inform this discussion. We had to make people understand what was going to happen if you retroactively fit contracts. That claims that you all are setting aside to pay for natural catastrophes and other things that are insurable were in danger. So we worked very hard to do this. We used digital advertising. We testified before Congress. In one thing that we've done now, if you still go to the website, you can actually get more informed on the likes what we heard earlier, risk-based pricing, ESG, and innovation. All of these things are now challenges that we need to inform discussions on. Year ago, we were at the peak of this campaign. This is just media coverage that was happening. Because you had celebrity chefs, because you had the sporting world, you had a lot of attention being paid to this, a lot of familiar names happening, and a lot of media coverage. Now what you're gladly seeing is by the end of the year, the discussion is going down and it's gone into litigation phase, which is still going to be costly to this industry because we've got runaway litigation happening. Nonetheless, we do feel we were able to inform this discussion in the right way and make sure that people understood, and they took the retroactive contract issue right off the shelf, which was a very good thing. So now, and just last week, there was a hearing on this. The whole reason why everybody was up in arms is because there was no system in place to make sure that we systematically were able to address a pandemic at a government level, because the federal government is the only entity that has the financial wherewithal to help and provide that financial relief. We still don't have a system. And that's why as we went through all of this and all of the media and the hoopla that was happening is because the government didn't have a system, and when you don't have a system and government set up, politics set in, and so we began to see delays in all of the financial relief that they needed. Again, our customers wanted help, so they were trying to get help any way possible they could. Now they're talking about it. They had a hearing, like I said, about a federal system. What we're doing at III is making sure that people understand we need the federal government to take a primary role in this. This is not an insurable event. It's got to be widely accessible and efficient, and try and eliminate fraud. And then finally, it needs to address and understand business industries like insurance, and not make sure that we're trying to fit something into an industry that's not capable of handling it all. There's still discussion and debate as to whether or not insurance should have a role in the facilitation of the system or not. And that was the arguments that were made last week before Congress. I don't think we'll actually get anywhere with this system. I think it's going to go off the shelf. They've got other things on. So at this point, I think we're just having hearings because we need to have hearings, and God forbid a pandemic happen again, but we don't have a system in place yet. And so I do think we're potentially at risk again in our industry if something happens and we don't have a system in place at the government level. So how did the industry fare economically? And our senior economist, I'm not an economist, I just play one on this stage with you because the senior economist it helps me out. But he's he wants to make sure that we call it insurance economics, because insurance economics is different. And this is one thing that we've struggled with sometimes as an industry, is making people understand we are different in financial services, and people need to understand that. In fact, we've been doing a lot of that work and briefing the likes of the Federal Reserve to help them understand the difference of insurance, because During the first financial crisis, when I came into this industry, we were chasing a news cycle and a potential risk in our industry because we got lumped in with banks, because people didn't understand that insurance is large, because the way we model ourselves, because we hold capital for long term, we don't have those short-term blips that we saw in the likes of banking. So we've got to educate people, and we've got to make people understand that insurance economics are different. The economy and insurance are very strongly tied to one another. As you can see here, this is net premium growth, direct written premiums with year-over-year GDP. Thankfully, we lagged just a little bit, so that big orange dip that you're seeing in our economy, we didn't have as much of that, but it was a negative environment for us overall. Keep hitting the wrong button, sorry. So where are we going now? This is a big debate. It's actually historically unprecedented where the spectrum of opinions are as to where the economy is going. You've got a market side that's looking at a short-term picture, and you've got the Fed side that looks at a long-term picture. Monetary policy is always a longer-term. We think at the III that you need to understand it's a 2-year view, not a year view. So we don't want it. Most of the stuff that we'll start looking at, we don't look at year over year. In this case, we look at 2 years, because if you look at year over year, it's just not a comparison. It's absolutely apples and oranges in terms of how you look at that. We're just getting back to normal. So to look at year over year versus the economic chaos that happened in 2020 isn't, in our opinion, an accurate way to look at how we're going to recover. So we look at that kind of VU recovery that extends into 2022. The Fed is talking about employment. This is a big thing for them in terms of where they're going with their rates and where they think the economic growth will happen. And we do have an unemployment issue. We do have a labor issue. We have labor shortage. People are not going back to work. People left big urban centers like New York City, and they haven't come back yet. So we've got an issue with employment that's still out there. And again, it's not a year over year. It's going to take a couple years to get this employment levels back to where they were, and that's where the Fed is looking at. Whereas the market thinks this is all about inflation. And again, if you look at inflation simply from a year over year, it's an apples to oranges comparison. Because again, we're getting back to normal. We had significant changes that were happening that just aren't economically sustainable. And so it's a different view. It's a short-term view, which markets tend to do. But that's where the big difference in the spectrum of where the economy is going. The market believes it's going to jump right back up. The Fed thinks this is going to be a little bit slower. We tend to agree with the Fed. And we tend to, even on inflation and pricing, you're going to see some inflation, but the trends are going to go much slower, and it will get back into a normal place. We believe this is a short-term inflation issue, not a long-term inflation issue. And this is because it's a bit of a transition. You're seeing pockets have more inflation, pockets in our economy in pricing have more inflation than others. Here you see the inflation levels of poultry, relatively modest to the likes of lumber, right? We have lumber hoarders happening, and so big prices spiking. Same with the likes of motor vehicle repairs we're seeing, and housing. These things are pockets, and obviously our industry is tied to these areas, but it's not a broad spectrum of inflation that we're seeing. So our outlook right now is that we'll see relatively modest growth. And this aligns with the Federal Reserve as well. We think, and we're going to be putting out our new forecasts here in mid-August. So if you're a III member, you are able to get onto our members-only webinar and hear from our economists in all the different areas. But we still believe that it's going to be modest growth. We don't get up to the areas where the market view gets into the 8, 9, and 10% growth levels. Still some things hanging out there, though, that could impact that. One area in particular that we're seeing and is a cause for concern, and we're looking at closely, is cyber and what that could do. What if we have a pandemic-like cyber event? How does that fare, one, for our industry and the economy? So we're beginning to see just people being concerned about this. Housing prices, are we in a housing bubble right now? So there are some threats out there, and we're still seeing the threat of COVID-19 potential. This is happening right now. We're seeing with this Delta variant, masks getting back on. I live in Washington, D.C. You can't go into a restaurant anymore without wearing a mask as of last Saturday. So what does this all mean? Today they said we're at a 7-day high, average high in terms of COVID infections that was a high from last summer. So we're getting back into an interesting place as to what COVID's going to do to the economy too. So have to keep an eye on that as well in terms of recovery. So how did the industry perform, and do we think it will perform going forward? Overall, this industry, slow and steady wins the race. So all of our economic indicators are relatively positive, but they're not big spiking positives, right? We rely primarily on the likes of fixed investment. In fact, that 18% that you're seeing there, which is our exposure to equities, was actually up a couple years ago in the 20-25% range. So we're going back to our safe fixed investments with all this market volatility. Seeing growth in our investments overall, again, not huge significant spikes, but good growth. The combined ratio looks like it's creeping back under 100, but you'll see we've actually had a nice 4-year stretch on our combined ratio. And the policyholder surplus hasn't always been a big economic indicator actually for us at III, but because it took a little dip during COVID, we started paying attention to it. It's back up to where we think it should be, about twice as much of a level before you start getting into some solvency issues. And then overall, we still see net premiums growing faster than the economy. This tends to be a normal thing, but we believe that will get back on track again. And net premium written growth, so last year we saw it actually outperformed what we thought during that level, but we're still a little bit below the 10-year historical average. We're going to see, we're right now looking at the policyholder dividends, which are neutral at this point. And then here's our combined ratio. And you're seeing, most of the time, we have been looking at years, most of the time we've been getting over 100, but you're seeing two stretches right there in 2012 to 15 where we were below 100, and then we're back on that trend as well. Again, it's creeping up towards 100. But if you're looking at one thing in particular, when you have these 3-year stretches, these are historical. That first 3-year stretch that we saw starting in 2012 actually was the first time since the 70s that we saw that. So we're getting our underwriting in good place, if you will. Here's our policyholder surplus. I'm going to talk a little bit more about policyholder surplus when we go into the ESG topic, but again, a good illustration of how this industry, when you see areas where there was economic volatility, pure economic volatility, the financial crisis in 2008, we dipped a little, went right back up. You see the COVID dip there, very temporary, got ourselves back up as well in terms of the policyholder surplus. It's a good story for us to tell. I mean, you always hear about, is this industry overcapitalized? But from our perspective at III, it's really nice to be able to point to a policyholder surplus when you've got 4 hurricanes in the Atlantic at the same time, and CNBC is trying to ask if the industry is going to face solvency pressure. So the other thing to understand is where our income and profitability is. Investments are the vast majority of where profitability is in the industry. In fact, assets under management in this industry are close to $7 trillion. That's as big as BlackRock. But you're also seeing in this picture that we're getting a focus as well on underwriting. So the green areas where underwriting is, you're seeing that we're beginning to grow our underwriting as we're facing some pressure. You're seeing the decline in investments because we've seen rates not be where they are, but so at the same time we're getting our underwriting back in check. And this is our yield on investments and assets. So again, as the rates have been what they were, it hasn't moved in the right direction. We do believe that we're going to get that direction back up to where we would like it to actually begin to grow again in terms of our assets. Because we're very reliant on fixed investments and monetary policy, we have been mostly impacted by the rates and where they've been. But we do see that the rates in a year or two, we're probably going to begin at least trending more positive. And so by and large, what you're seeing here is the overall performance of our industry being positive. We were right around the 10-year average, but it was stronger, and it was also stronger than expected through COVID. So again, as an industry, we faced a lot of impacts. We kept the claims paying, but we still kept ourselves in a good place in terms of profitability and income. And then the last thing I'll talk about, which is always a good economic indicator, are mergers, M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Haven't seen quite as much on the carrier side, seeing them here and there, but this is actually a depiction of what's happening on the agency side, which I know my friend Steve and I were just talking about. One trend that we were seeing, except something happened with the antitrust suit that filed, is that it used to be the little guys were getting absorbed by the big guys, but now what we actually saw was a difference. Obviously, we're seeing big going after big. It'll be interesting now that we've seen the Justice Department file the antitrust suit and what happened with Aon and Willis as to whether or not that trend will actually continue. But everybody's looking for margin, everybody's looking for yield, and everybody's looking for scale. So especially on the agents and brokers side. So you're seeing a lot of activity there. So underwriting trends, we'll get a little bit into, and this is where, again, we're forecasting now at the III with our new actuaries and new economists that we've brought in. We're able to actually begin forecasting. So if you're a member, you're able to get this information, one, in real time through our dashboard, but secondly, through quarterly updates. But I'll give you all, this is the last quarter that we did through lines of business. We'll be updating it again in mid-August. And I'll just go through some lines of business here. Commercial property was probably the most impacted by COVID. Stores closed, businesses, you've got a lot, everything had to go stagnant. But we do see it going back in the positive for commercial property. Commercial property rates have continued to increase. As a result of kind of where things are, obviously looking at like a hard market here. But the other two things that are outlying on this line of business, one, where the litigation goes with the likes of business insurance and where the costs are, and bankruptcies as well coming out. So depending on how long it takes for this area to recover and businesses to get back open, I think is going to be a real potential challenge for this line of business. Homeowners was probably one of the areas that we saw less impact during COVID than others. We all think that when people are at home, they're more dangerous. But we actually didn't see more claims. Not as many kitchen fires and all of that. But we did see active catastrophe seasons. And I think what we saw in Texas was a real interesting hit for the industry, and it'll be interesting as we get through the hurricane season this year. Nothing yet. Last year, I think we got lucky on hurricane season, and that it didn't hit very populated areas. But I'm going to show you some illustrations where it's inevitable that it will. So we've got to keep an eye on it for that reason. Other thing to consider about homeowners right now is we have seen those very high lumber costs happening. We got a labor shortage in construction, so there's some issues potentially challenging that in terms of people getting their claims back and getting back recovered, and the costs of all of that as well. So commercial auto has really been under significant strain for some time. You've got just the amount of costs that go along with what's going on the roads is significant. You got some relief because less personal auto were on the roads, but the commercial did try and stay intact and kept going. So there was some relief, though, with less people being on the roads through COVID, but we don't see that really lasting in any way. We do see there's going to continue to be significant strain in the commercial auto space for a couple years at least. And then personal relief, even though the industry gave back $14 billion, we still ended up in a relatively good place. And we do see that this industry will get, on personal auto, will get itself back up. You had less accidents through COVID, so obviously you had less claims. One thing that we think is going to get interesting on personal auto are using telematics and even short-term driving. Those two things started getting a lot more interest from consumers through COVID than before. People began to get a little more comfortable with it. If I'm not driving as much, why should I be paying as much? Those types of things. It'd be interesting whether or not that trend will continue, and whether or not it's something that sticks into the industry in the personal auto space. The other thing to consider, for a couple things to consider that are still happening in the personal auto space that makes it a bit of a challenging market, is autos are just getting more expensive. They might be putting in more safety tools, but they're certainly more and more expensive year over year. The other thing about it that's happening as well is auto repairs are getting more and more expensive. It's not just about the bumper that, by the way, on a mid-sized luxury vehicle has gone up 3 times an amount in the last 5 years in terms of cost. You have to have somebody that knows how to calibrate the thing with all the cameras and everything else that's on it. So auto repairs will continue we see to be a challenge in the personal auto space. And then workers' compensation was a bit of an outlier for the commercial space, and the rates have been going down in workers' compensation. I think coming out of COVID, where the question mark happens in workers' compensation is maybe the long tail results of people working at home more, and whether or not that's going to have impact on claims in different ways. People in a workspace that's controlled, you are able to understand and make sure that the environment is safer. But people when they have their own choice, just want the cheaper chair over the expensive chair, and they're sitting on it longer. So are there going to be some longer term results from COVID-19 and workers' comp? I think something that we're going to keep an eye on. And cyber is something that has really been an interesting part of this issue in the liability side of it. So you're seeing how it became underwriting where the rates got a little low there, and now they're jumping right back up. And so what we've seen is a lot of people wanted to jump into the market because it was a new market, new space. We all knew we didn't have enough data. Now that we're getting more data, now that we're having more incidents, now that we're having likes of ransomware, it's being something that we're critically underwriting more and making sure the exclusions are there and or a separate cyber business policy, for example. The other side of the cyber issue, one, it's not just about a hack, if you will. This is a political risk that's happening. Most of these cyber incidents, it's not an IT issue as much as a diplomacy one. You've got states inside of states that are made from cyber in terms of their revenue and their economies, right? They're state-driven, sovereign-driven types of incidents. So we're actually beginning a project at III is what is cyber insurance and what is it not? Because again, there's a government issue going on, law enforcement and political diplomacy and all of these things that really the insurance industry can't control. So we don't want to get to where we were in the pandemic where people just think insurance is a solution for cyber. So we're right now informing this discussion and helping people understand those differences. And so one thing I will put out there, because we said that commercial rates were beginning to increase, we are seeing some plateau in those rates and the pricing. So we may be seeing where the commercial side of the business, in terms of property casualty, may be plateauing on rates, whereas it's been rising year over year. So just something to consider. And then I'll just give you a plug. If you want to get all of this information for yourself, or if you want to interact with it, we've actually built a system at the III where you can go and interact and get lines of business and our forecasting and all those types of things. So great new economic tools that for you at the III, economics.iii.org if you're a member. ESG is a big issue as well for all of us, and this is something we think we can really lean in on in a good way. We've got a really good story to tell. So I know many of you with your regulators and others are saying, what are you doing for ESG? What are you doing around climate? Well, our industry has been looking at climate for a long time. These are insurance loss costs since the 80s. They've increased 700%. And if you know that and most of your loss costs deal with natural catastrophes, you obviously know something's going on with the climate in some way, shape, or form. Steve, I think, will tell you too, it's some of the things that are going on with climate is not just the catastrophe cycle. So I know he's going to get into that. But again, we're prepared. We're paying close attention to this. This is why our policyholder surplus is increasing, because we know something's going on. and we need to withstand it. We need to keep our promises as an industry. And this is why, we say at III, ESG is in our industry's DNA. We've been looking at environmental issues. We help underwrite, recover, all of those ways as we're experiencing these large amounts of changes that are happening. One, because of catastrophes. Two, because people are living more in harm's way. The governance side of, you cannot be more governed than the U.S. property casualty industry. So we have a very significant, so anybody questions, you get questions on governance, depending on where you are as an insurer, you know that you're spending a lot of time being governed. You've got the ORSA process. So sometimes when you get these buzz terms, people want to layer on new things, that are ESG. And there are some disclosure issues that I think will probably happen, but where we're getting worried is whether or not we're going to layer on new regulation or different things just because, ESG is something new that people are looking at. And on the social side, you heard me talk about all these organizations that you're supporting that bring social benefit. And you're also all those fixed investments that we have more on the income. Those are doing community building. So you've got a very good story to tell on ESG. And if you want more information on it, we're putting it out and together. You can go to our website. But this is something we shouldn't shy away from. We should really lean in as an industry. The Fed has been, one thing we're trying to do is make sure the Fed doesn't want to regulate us. So we're explaining our industry. But as we're explaining our industry, they're getting excited and potentially using insurance as a model for other financial services and how they might want to look at ESG. So just a little bit more info on how we drive the ESG. Getting back, we help communities be more resilient. We help people manage their risk as change is happening. We give back significant amounts in terms of charity and community building. And then, all of these organizations, IIHS, IBHS, III, these are all industry-sponsored events meant to bring society good. So the last thing I'll touch on quickly is around resilience and the project that we have at the III, our Resilience Accelerator. One thing we're doing here is this is actually something you can go and interact with at resilience.iii.org. Is we've tracked hurricanes visually back to the 50s, and we've now put on the economic impact of all of those. This is a track from 2000 to 2009. This is the track going back to the 50s. Our point here is these things aren't going to miss communities, and people are moving more and more into harm's way with the likes of hurricanes. So we've got to figure out how to help people understand there needs to be behavioral changes that take place. Our customers need to think about risk a little bit more. It's really neat to want to live on a barrier island or in a beautiful forest in California. But as it stands, we don't fit risk into the everyday property purchasing process as much as we should. And we need to, because I think Steve will show you that populations are changing. And they're moving into, Texas's population has doubled in the last couple decades. And Texas has every natural catastrophe you could think of exposed on that state. So populations are shifting, people are moving more and more harm's way. We've got to make sure that we create a movement so that people understand there's only so much we can do with price on risk, right? We need to help people understand that this is something we need to manage the risk a little bit better and become more resilient. I've sat around a lot of resilience discussions for a long time, and everybody gets frustrated that the change doesn't happen. So we've created action partners that are dedicated to really driving change. We've set up a memorandum of agreement with Fema. We work directly with the National Flood Insurance Program. Steve has done a great job at Aon, who you hear from, providing us data and information. So Colorado State University with the hurricane forecasting, and Wharton with their risk center. So we want to drive actionable change and make sure that communities understand how to be more resilient. And one way we do it is through interactive illustrations of risk that's out there. So these are some screenshots from the website I mentioned to you that you can go to. You can look at every county and interact with it on NFIP take-up rates. It's alarming. The lack of NFIP take-up rates, and as well, you can look at special hazard zones now. We've worked with the InsurTech paper crane that allows you to understand personal and commercial property in proximity to special hazard zones. The other last neat tool that we put up there that Hazard Hub helped us build is, again, you can go to Zillow and get your walkabout score, or you can get your school ratings, and those change behaviors. Trust me, my wife said, We're not living in a place that has an 8 or below school rating. Changed our behavior. What about putting this, and we're working right now to try and get this into a real estate app. This is you can type in any property in the United States, and you can get up to 30 variables of risk for it, for free. Hazard Hub helped us build it. Hazard Hub, actually, you can get up to 300 variables of risk if you work with them. But we're just trying to bring more understanding of risk when it comes to people, again, wanting to move into these beautiful areas. They need to understand what the risk is, because insurance can only go so far as the solution. So with that, I'll leave you. I think disruption will always be part of what we do in insurance, but I think we really, as an industry, step up in so many ways. And part of what I try and do with III in this job is not just empowering the consumer, but empowering you to feel good about what this industry does. And I think we proved ourselves through COVID-19 that we can step up in terms of giving back to the community, step up in terms of keeping claims, step up in terms of making sure that we stayed economically fit through it as well. And we have more to do. We have more work to do. We have more education to bring to the consumer. But overall, we're going to do that. And again, we are most well poised as an industry to lead through this disruption. So hopefully you feel better about that. And hopefully we'll have more good stuff to talk about if I get to visit you again. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Sean. I don't know if we planned it that way, but I think, Sean, I think you set Steve up for really well when you talked about the Resilience Accelerator. So I get the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Steve Bowen. So Steve's with Aon. Steve has been had a lifelong fascination with the weather, with a scientific background in meteorology, and after starting his professional career in television, he shifted into insurance when he joined Aon in 2007. His current title is Managing Director and the Global Head of Catastrophe Insight. He is based in the Impact Forecasting Division. His role is with helping to help others to communicate the growing risks of natural perils and climate change around the world. A key motivation of his work features the emerging and evolving trends associated with increasing weather volatility, climate change, population exposure patterns, and natural hazard-related financial losses. He is a frequent collaborator with the governmental agencies, academia, and insurance groups, and has co-authored several published peer-reviewed journals. Steve earned his Master's of Science in Business Analytics degree from the University of Notre Dame and his Bachelor's of Science in Meteorology from Florida State University. So please help me welcome Steve Bowen.
Thank you. Well, first off, thanks to Sean for giving me an extra 15 minutes, because I am known as a talker and I can talk about this stuff all day, and I won't. But I will also say that I come in peace. I know a lot of times people see the words climate change and it's still a very political, hot topic in terms of where things stand. But today my argument is going to be that while hazard is a significant driver of the impacts that we continue to see on a daily basis, but there's also other components that are increasing the risk and therefore leading to increased losses and also growing risk. But climate change, of course, is one of the factors which we will get to here today. So just starting from the top. So this is looking at the number of disaster declarations by Fema going back since 1980. And you can see that there has definitely been a fairly notable uptick in terms of the number of disaster declarations over the last, say, 20 years especially. A lot of you may be surprised to see that the counties that have seen the highest number of disaster declarations are actually out in Southern California. A lot of that is due to high frequency of wildfire occurrence, and if you're paying any attention as to what's going on out west right now in terms of the historic drought. Very, very concerned that we may be adding some more disaster declarations now that we're entering into the peak of the season. But you can definitely see across the entire country that many areas have seen notable declarations because of high frequency of various natural catastrophe events, most notably severe convective storm. Here in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, the trend again is there. You can definitely see over time that there has been an increase over the past, say, 20 to 30 years, peaking in 2011. I think many of you are familiar with how active it was in terms of severe thunderstorms, significant tornado outbreaks, especially in Massachusetts. And I also listed the most disaster declarations per county. Perhaps a surprise that a county in New Hampshire actually leads. A lot of that has to deal with flooding, nor'easters, freeze events, and whatnot. So we know that risk is everywhere. It's not just in one specific part of the country, that the disaster risk is always there, and the impacts, as we know, continue to grow. Sean showed a variation of this data already, but just to put it into further context and also adding in what we call the economic loss, which is the portion of the damage, or the overall portion of damage, so that includes damage that is not covered by insurance. You can see that the general trend, of course, is going up. We have had some years that are definite outliers, 2005 and 2017 especially. The last couple of years outside of 2017 have again been elevated. I can say as of today, we're already at $56 billion of payout for the industry, which is quite significant, especially considering we have not really gotten into the peak of the hurricane season yet, so we're off to another very busy start. But one thing I do want to focus on this slide and the next slide is look at how much blue you see, which is a large portion of the damage which is just not covered by insurance. A lot of this is primarily driven by hurricane or water-related damage, so flooding events. I think a lot of you can think back to Sandy, you can think back to Irene, Tropical Storm Lee, the remnants. A lot of that damage simply was not covered by insurance because of very low NFIP insurance take-up, which Sean mentioned a bit earlier. But as we can see, just from a loss perspective, that losses continue to get more expensive over time. Now, when you add it all together, since 1980, the United States has recorded $2.6 trillion, with a T, dollars in damage from natural disasters. And only a small sliver of that is actually tied to earthquake. Obviously, 1989, 1994, those are the last two huge years we had for earthquakes out west. It actually brings up a different point, which is not climate change related. But whenever I do talks like this, I always want to emphasize is that earthquake is one of those perils that we're just not paying enough attention to. We are basically a sitting duck in terms of the industry, talking about areas out west in California all the way up into Cascadia, where insurance take-up is actually underneath 10% in most counties, especially in San Francisco's Bay Area. So when the inevitable big one comes, we're looking at a substantial portion of damage which is not likely to be covered by insurance. And that is very, very concerning when we're talking about overall risk and not just climate risk. But I think we need to be thinking about this as well. But I think perhaps the most unbelievable part of this, and which may be unbelievable to all of you, is the insured statistics. So 1.2 trillion, which is a big number. But look at how close severe convective storm losses are to hurricane losses. Very, very close. Only 1% differential between the two, which I think is an important point to be made here, where thunderstorms, severe convective storm it's a fancy way of saying severe thunderstorms. So that includes tornadoes, hail, damaging straight line winds, and flash flooding as well. But what we've seen is essentially a new normal. When we're talking about climate and losses, we always hear, okay, is this a new normal? Is this a new normal? Many times it's too early to really say definitively that we're seeing significant changes up front. But with SCS losses, we are definitely in the new normal, where every year since 2008, we've seen at least $10 billion in industry payouts. And in fact, in the last decade alone, we're averaging closer to $20 billion. And in last year, in 2020, we actually set a new record in terms of an industry loss of $37 billion, even more than we saw in 2011. So the annual consistency of SCS continues to become more prevalent. It's almost a linear rate of growth as opposed to a tropical cyclone where there's a bit more volatility in any given year. Now I wanted to show this slide because one way of phrasing that you hear a lot is the differentiation between a primary peril and a secondary peril within the industry. Now, historically, yes, tropical cyclones and earthquakes, the quote-unquote primary perils, do tend to cause, on an individual event basis, higher levels of loss, highlighted by Katrina in 2005. That does remain the massive outlier in terms of $87 billion in terms of industry payouts. Earthquake as well. But if you look at these other quote-unquote secondary perils, there's a lot of big numbers there. A lot of these perils are now showing upwards of $10 billion of industry payout, which is pretty significant. And most of these events are largely in the United States. There's certainly some that are international, but a lot of these are US based. But if you look on the right side, severe convective storm, the outbreak that spawned the Midwest derecho last year was $9.5 billion for a breakout. For an outbreak, that is a huge figure. The Texas freeze, the large North American freeze that we saw earlier this year, almost $15 billion of insured loss, which is unheard of when we're talking about that type of peril. So the bigger question is, maybe we shouldn't be talking about primary and secondary perils and just understand that everything is a growing risk and there's always this potential for individual events to cause a loss with a very big number. So just how we're framing it, I think, is also starting to change. So what is driving the increased loss cost? So I'm going to start off with the hazard itself and not go too deep into climate change. I'll get into that a little bit later on, but just a quick overview in terms of some of these individual perils themselves. So I already given some of this away, but this is a look at the number of international events, including US events, which have caused at least $500 million of insured loss. And the trend is pretty striking, no? We look at last year in the US, there were 20 separate individual events that had more than $500 million worth of insured loss. So I hate using this analogy, but it really is a matter of death by a million paper cuts, where you get these smaller events or mid-size events, and they aggregate to a much larger event or a much larger total at the end of the year than you may have initially anticipated. Just talking to a lot of clients, a lot of folks are starting to think more about aggregate covers because these types of losses are becoming much more prevalent in a given year. But the trend is pretty obvious in terms of the frequency of how much is happening. It's not just the US, we're seeing a lot of this happening internationally as well. Places like Australia, Italy, Germany, in fact, Europe just saw their costliest SCS outbreak in late June, approaching $5 billion for them. That's a huge loss, and most of that was attributed to hail. So the risk for this peril is definitely going up, and it's getting more expensive. Now, when we're talking about the drivers, as I've just mentioned, hail is definitely driving most of these losses. In any given year, insurers, 50 to 80% of claims are related to hail, even though it doesn't get as much attention as, say, tornadoes. Tornadoes tend to be more sexy on television. They're more fascinating to see because the damage is more destructive in terms of homes and businesses being entirely destroyed. But hail is definitely the sub-peril of SCS, which continues to be a significant driver of the loss. And also we have damaging winds, these non-tornadic straight line winds, which can also be quite expensive. Here in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, tornado risk, typically low or medium. I know that there's been an uptick in tornadic activity here in the last couple of weeks, but generally tornadoes aren't driving most of the losses. Large hail, not a lot. You do get some instances of large hail where I'm defining that as at least 2 inches in diameter or larger. I would say that's lower, but the damaging wind risk and derecho risk continues to be quite high. I think a lot of you, if you've been here a long time, can think back to June of 2012. That was one of the costlier derecho events that we've seen prior to last August in the Midwest. But again, this is a risk that is there. Derecho, the term is not new. It's actually been around since the late 1800s from a professor at the University of Iowa. But the intensity of these events, especially what we saw last year in Iowa, is starting to make us recalculate in terms of how we're thinking about derecho risk. And actually, we do have a decent level of climatology, which is sort of the average, the longer-term average of when these events happen. And we've just come out of what we call peak derecho season. On the upper right, you can actually see there's a spatial scale showing where the greatest frequency of derecho occurrence is anticipated. You can see it generally goes from the upper Midwest, and then it comes down into the Mid-Atlantic. Typically, you see in the summer, we have I would say, in terms of being a weather nerd, I love this phrase, but it's the ring of fire pattern, where you get a ridge of high pressure that sits up, and you get this heat dome, and you get the jet stream, and basically get all this hot air that's rotating around. You get a little bit of moisture in there, and you get storms that track along the outer periphery, and you get these very fast-moving lines of thunderstorms, which, as they accelerate their forward speed, tend to bow out, and they really do cause a lot of damage. On the bottom, this is a radar composite showing the derecho last year in August, which started in Iowa. 140 mile per hour wind gusts in Cedar Rapids. Virtually every structure in that city had some type of damage. It made its way all the way to Chicago. I live in Chicago. We had damage in my condo complex. In fact, it took almost 2.5 months until they cleaned out all of the damage. We had a couple of tornadoes touch down about a half mile from my house. So a really historic event. And 140 miles per hour is essentially a Category 4 inland hurricane. And structures in the Midwest and even here in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast are not built to withstand winds of that intensity. So if this is going to become something that's a bit more frequent, then we got to perhaps start thinking differently in terms of how we're building and how we're retrofitting structures to be able to withstand something that, again, as folks are calling an inland hurricane. Hurricanes. So this is looking at the entire time scale of official data that we have from NOAA going back to the 1850s. So one thing that'll stand out, of course, is last year, where we set a record in terms of the number of named storms. We had 30, which is the first time we hit 30, surpassing the 28 that we saw in 2005. We had 14 hurricanes. It was one below what we saw in 2005. And then we had 7 major hurricanes as well. But the takeaway here is that we haven't necessarily seen a lot of any real trend that's emerging in terms of the numbers of storms going up. There's definitely going to be years with more volatility based on the conditions in place, whether the phase of ENSO, for instance. If we're in a La Nina, that tends to lead to more activity. We do know that as technology has improved since the 1960s, that we have a better ability for detection. There's been some recent research coming out which actually goes back and tries to account for weaker storms that may have been missed back in the 1800s. And the trend really does not change. It's generally fairly flat. But behaviorally, storms are definitely starting to change, and I'll get into that a bit more. But in terms of the raw numbers themselves, even in that instance, we're not seeing too much of a change when it comes to storms. Same thing in terms of landfalls. This is looking at aggregates, and I've plotted where we historically have seen all hurricane landfalls in the U.S. Of course, Florida leads in terms of the number of named storm landfalls, hurricane landfalls, and what we call major hurricane landfalls, which is at least Category 3 or above in terms of intensity. We definitely have seen activity here in the Northeast. We don't have to remind anyone of Sandy in 2012. The frequency isn't necessarily high, but when they do occur, they can be quite damaging. But even in terms of landfall trends in the U.S. as well, it's largely flat. In fact, we went 11 years in a row, 11 seasons in a row, which ended in 2017, between major hurricane landfalls, between that Category 3 or above. So we haven't necessarily seen a massive shift. But as I'm going to get into a little bit later, and as Sean has already alluded to, the risk continues to go up. So really, it only does take one event to really alter how we perceive the risk of these events moving forward, because we know that they're going to be hitting a lot more stuff in the future. And tying it back here into the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, these are, I pulled some satellite images from some of the more notable storms that have affected this region. As I mentioned before, hurricane frequency risk is generally fairly low here. You don't expect to get a lot of storms that are maintaining their full tropical characteristics when they get up here, but the risk is always high. And the biggest risk, I think everyone knows, is water. And that's not just storm surge, but it's the heavy rainfall. We saw it from Irene especially. That set a ton of records in Vermont specifically in terms of how much damage was incurred. And unfortunately, a large percentage of that went uninsured. But this is definitely a concern as the behavior of storms starts to change. We continue to see more warmth and moisture in the atmosphere. It allows more rainfall to fall. Storms may be slowing their forward motion, and that leads to more events, say like a Harvey, Tropical Storm Imelda, Hurricane Florence, just examples from the last couple of years, which led to, as we all know, very, very substantial damage. So again, the water risk, and it's not just surge risk, it's also the inland flood component of these storms, which continues to make us quite concerned moving forward. And sticking with the flood theme, so I'm jumping ahead slightly showing this in terms of climate. So in a couple of months ago, we entered something called the new climatological era. So every 10 years, we shift the 30-year window. So when you're watching your, hopefully you're watching your local TV weatherman, and he says, today it was 90 degrees, it was 2 degrees above normal. So that normal is just that comparing it to the 30-year average you had before. So we have now shifted to 1991 to 2020. So this is the new climatological normal. And this specific graphic here is doing a comparison to the 20th century average for precipitation across every county in the U.S. And it's pretty striking between the East Coast and the West Coast. At least the Rocky Mountains tends to be the dividing line, where you can see that there's definitely been much heavier precipitation falling across the Midwest, parts of the plains, here in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, and some parts of the Southeast as well. In terms of frequency of rainfall events, again, hasn't necessarily changed very much, but as we're seeing that more rainfall is falling. Now, if you want to impress your friends when you go home today, your families, I'm going to give you a quick physics lesson in terms of what this all means in terms of why we're seeing more rain and moisture falling. So there's something called the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, okay? And this is a very simple law of physics and thermodynamics. So for every 1 degree centigrade of warming in the atmosphere can hold 7% more moisture, okay? So because of that, we definitely have surpassed the 1 degree centigrade threshold in the last 10 to 20 years in terms of atmospheric warmth and oceanic warmth. That, therefore, is leading to at least 5 to 7% more precipitation on average per rainfall event, per heavy rainfall event. So when we have patterns set up where we see heavy rain opportunities, this leads to this type of map. Now out west, it's been the opposite, where we've seen a reduction in terms of the southwest monsoon. And as I say that, of course, they're having their strongest southwest monsoon they've seen in about 5 years right now, not including California. But the overall trend has definitely been much, much lower and much more reduced rainfall. In fact, most of the West is seeing its worst drought they've seen this century. In fact, the state of California, more than 90% of the state is in at least severe or extreme or exceptional drought. So we're very, very concerned about fire season this year. But overall, you can see that the trend, because of areas where the jet stream behavior is starting to change, we do see more opportunity for these heavier rainfall events occurring on a per event basis. And the statistics definitely show that. Sean referenced this earlier, and I'll just reiterate it again because it's a very important point. NFIP take-up is very localized, primarily areas across the Gulf Coast. There are some areas in the Midwest along the Mississippi River where you see some decent take-up. But generally where you see the highest payouts have been, that's where most of the take-up actually is. And unfortunately, while there are, there's good take-up in the tri-state area around New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, parts of Pennsylvania, there's still way too low take-up, which leaves these massive gaps, and it's why we see this huge disparity in terms of the economic loss and the insured loss. And we have a long way to go. As I talk about the rainfall increase and the heavier precipitation, more flash flood events. I think we've all seen the pictures in the last year alone. These really significant flooding events which have occurred. It's not going away, and as we've seen, can result in billions and billions of dollars worth of payouts in a lot of these counties. Finally, winter weather. So I will say, and I've said this to every presentation I've given since February, is that I never imagined in January that I'd be talking about this as a major peril. Winter weather historically has not been a major loss driver. In the 1993 in March, the storm of the century was always sort of the high bar in terms of the overall cost. It was the only winter weather peril event which caused more than $10 billion of economic loss. The industry loss was roughly $3.5 to $4 billion insured dollars. in today's dollars. But we've definitely started to see some more unusual behavior based on what we saw in February, and I'll touch on that in a few moments. But one of the reasons why we're a bit more concerned is the fact that the polar ice caps are warming. The graphic on the bottom right here is showing annual warming using an October to September time scale, that the Arctic is warming at nearly a double rate than the globe as a whole, which is quite concerning because as the polar ice caps melt, that leads to not just sea levels rising, but it also leads to what we call more weather weirdness, and that's because the jet stream becomes a bit wavier. It's sort of like a frequency wave where it just becomes more unusual. Patterns can get stuck. It really accelerates the ice melt and really leads us seeing more of these unusual types of weather events. Now, how that plays into the polar vortex, and I'm still chuckling about this years later, how this and bombogenesis, I think that's another phrase, or bomb cyclone, that was another one that the media picked up on, which those terms, by the way, have been around for almost a century at this point. But in terms of the polar vortex and what we call sudden stratospheric warming, and that's a mouthful, but when the polar vortex is actually at its strongest, when it's not being disrupted, it's sitting on the poles, it's not moving. It doesn't affect anybody. But when you get this warming at the surface and the mid-levels of the atmosphere, that causes it to warm. It causes, basically, it's like this belt which starts to really unravel as it gets unspooled, so to speak. And then you get these pieces that drop down. It can be into parts of North America. It can be in Europe. In Europe, they had a big event called the Beast from the East a couple of years ago. Parts of Asia can get these, so it's not completely unusual. But if you get more of this type of warming into the polar ice caps and disruption of the polar vortex, it can lead to more of what we saw in February, where we had nearly 7 to 8 consecutive days of sub-freezing temperatures. And this is only showing the United States. It actually went down into parts of northern Mexico as well, where we had 7 to 8, or in some areas 9 or 10 consecutive days of sub-freezing temperatures, which is pretty unbelievable. And when you think of the infrastructure, which is in place right now in parts of the southern plains, it is not meant to withstand temperatures of this intensity in terms of cold intensity for that period of time. And unfortunately, that led to what we saw in Texas in terms of a complete failure of the infrastructure grid in place. Okay, so we've gone over the hazard now. What about us? The reality is we're driving most of the losses in terms of people themselves. So just very quickly, just showing population by county trends, looking at from 1900 to 1950, 2000 to what we saw in the latest census in 2020. It's pretty obvious to see where people are moving. People are definitely moving west. They're moving south, parts of the plains, Florida especially, areas that we know have a lot of just natural risk that's already built in. So essentially we're addicted to water, we're addicted to coastlines, and a lot of that, as we know, is where some of the highest risks exists for various types of perils. And of course, with more people means there's more houses, there's more stuff that is in harm's way. This is looking at the change in the number of housing units by county going back to 1950. And of course, you can see, again, a lot of areas, even here in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic, a lot of counties where there has been a lot of growth. And I think one of the things that's most interesting is how many of these suburban counties, these ex-urban counties, where people are starting to move, and COVID really accelerated a lot of this. Sean had mentioned already about what's happening in New York City. The same thing's happening in Chicago, where people are going to the suburbs. And that's expanding the potential risk that exists for when these types of events occur. And I made the reference before about folks wanting to live on the coastlines. This is the number of housing units since the start of the 20th century. How many additional housing units are on counties that are touching a coastline on the Pacific or the Atlantic? 25 million alone for the U.S. East Coast and 13 million on the West Coast. That is a lot of stuff in harm's way. So it only takes one event to really make a huge loss. And as Sean referenced the last year's hurricane season, and we had a record number of hurricane landfalls. We had 6. And really, it could have been way, 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 way worse. If we think about Hurricane Laura, for example, if that storm would have tracked another 100 miles to the east or to the west, bringing New Orleans or Houston into play, now we'd potentially be talking about a $200, $300 billion event if we get Houston involved with a rapidly intensifying Category 4, almost Category 5 storm. So, very, very lucky last year. Not to take away at all from what happened in Lake Charles, because those folks are going to be cleaning up for years to come. But if we're bringing in a lot of the major metros in play, then the losses could be even more significant. And just think of, again, what happened with Sandy. And that was technically not even a hurricane. That was an extratropical system at that point by the time it came ashore in New Jersey. So a lot to think about. I do want to expand again on this spread and this growth in terms of the suburban, exurban population. So there's something called the expanding bullseye theory. There's just some research done by some folks at Northern Illinois University where, and I'm using Dallas-Fort Worth because this is a great example where some of the fastest growth is occurring. So what I've done here is I've taken today's urban footprint and I've done basically scaled it by population going back to 1950. And I've taken the same hail swath and I've overlaid it over this, what the exposure looks like. So in 1950, there's a lot of white. There's a lot of stuff where that hail swath is just simply not hitting. But as we progressively get to where it is today, by the time that first hailstone falls, to the time the last one falls, it's falling over something over its entire path. So regardless of whether the intensity or the frequency of these events has occurred, the fact that there's just more stuff that's in harm's way because of the exposure growth is there's just greater opportunity for there to be loss. And this is, I'm using Dallas as the example because this is, what I call really the hail capital of the U.S., even though there's many other parts of the country which are very prone to hail. This theory can really be used for virtually every peril and every event footprint. So this is another reason why losses do continue to go up, again, regardless of whether or not events are becoming more intense by themselves. Congratulations, here in the Northeast, you have the largest homes on average anywhere in the U.S. This is also a part of that. You can see that obviously COVID last year caused a bit of a dip there. Home prices continue to go up. I'm expecting this to be spiking rather dramatically once we get the new data for 2020 and 2021. So this is another reason why losses go up. There's just more stuff in larger properties that need to be replaced if there is damage that has been incurred. Sean referenced this earlier around lumber costs. These replacement costs continue to go up. Last year, the last 12 to 15 months, skyrocketing lumber costs. It finally tailed off a bit in June, but this is another reason, and on top of the fact that there were labor shortages, there were other types of supply chain shortages, which really added some additional costs in terms of replacement, from damage of these large-scale events that had happened. So there's a lot of different factors in play here beyond the hazard, which is not only increasing the risk, but also causing the losses to continue to go up. So finally, climate change. And I will say on the outset here, I started off my career in television, and insurance or climate change was a topic that was important, but not something that was truly driving a lot of the narrative. And then I came into insurance, and up until 5 years ago, I was told that if you mention the word global warming or climate change, you're going to get fired. And since that time, I have never seen a topic that has changed so quickly in terms of just questions from clients, questions from executives, questions from the government, questions from virtually everybody wanting to know, what are we doing, how are we advising clients to start thinking about this? And a lot of this is regulatory, especially in Europe, where there are governmental mandates where if you're doing financial business there, you have to start reporting and conducting stress tests to show what your bottom line may look like based on various climate scenarios. So this is really, I think, kick-started it. New York is starting to talk about conducting some of these similar stress tests. California, even Vermont recently also announced this as well. So this is a topic that is really picking up the pace in terms of its importance and really causing a lot of conversations on how we're going to be reacting to it. But we really can't talk about this, though, without highlighting the uncertainty of climate change. Uncertainty does not mean that we don't know. that things are changing, but there's definitely varying levels of understanding and confidence based on different perils in terms of how well we understand the risk itself. So I'll start from the right and then go left. Where we have the highest level of confidence is around temperatures and precipitation. So we know that extreme heat events, more extreme cold events, that there's definitely more of an obvious signal that's emerging in some of the global climate model output. That corresponds to things like drought, and other types of perils that are more temperature-based. We have more confidence in what the impacts look like. In terms of tropical cyclone, we've already gone over the frequency of events has not necessarily changed very much, though we do know that storms are intensifying more rapidly when they do occur. That's not a surprise, given that the oceans continue to warm so quickly. And then we know what the human impacts can be once these things do come ashore. But as we get to, say, wildfire, which is a difficult one, where we know that California and parts of the West are seeing less precipitation, much hotter temperatures. The heat wave that we saw in the Pacific Northwest in Canada was beyond anything we've ever imagined, even beyond the worst case scenarios in the global climate model output. But wildfire is difficult because of the ignition. The ignition can either be human, and a lot of times is human caused. It's a cigarette butt. It can be a spark from a tire. It can be some idiot there was a big fire called the Valley Fire where it caused $1 billion of insured loss because the guy had an outdoor jacuzzi and wired it wrong, and when he started it up, it caused a spark. Gender reveal parties are causing a whole bunch of wildfires out west as well, and that has nothing to do with climate. It's the ignition, so that's why there is a bit of uncertainty when we're talking about it. Perhaps surprising the most is severe convective storm. We have the least amount of confidence in terms of what climate change is actually going to do to it. I will show what some of the latest research is showing. It's more around the environmental conditions becoming more favorable, but we have not seen any real change in terms of the number of tornadoes going up or down. In fact, the number of EF3 tornadoes has gone down in the last 20 years. This is the longest stretch on record between official EF or F5 tornadoes. In fact, the last one was in May 2013 in Moore, Oklahoma. That's actually a good streak, by the way. We're not rooting for more. But there's just not a lot there that's showing any sort of obvious signs where climate change is having an obvious impact in terms of the frequency of these types of events. So I always like to show this just to kind of put this into broader perspective that on a per peril basis, climate change is going to have different types of effects. So I mentioned severe convective storms. So these are two different views of studies showing climate change and what it could be doing and what we might be seeing in the future. On the left, it's looking at tornado environments. So the red is basically showing where conditions are becoming more favorable for tornadic activity. It might be a surprise to a lot of you that the historical tornado alley may be shifting. We typically thought it was from the plains up to the parts of the Midwest. But really what we've seen in the last, say, 15 to 20 years is a dramatic reduction in the number of tornadoes in parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and the shift has been more to the east and to the southeast. A lot of that can possibly be explained by the fact that we've had more instances of La Nina than we've seen El Nino or neutral conditions. During La Nina, the jet stream tends to shift a bit more to the east and to the south. And again, that puts areas, parts of the deep south at more risk for tornadic activity and parts of the Midwest as well. So the environment may be starting to shift in terms of those atmospheric conditions. The jet stream becomes a bit wavier, more unusual, and that leads to the more of these unusual types of conditions. Perhaps most concerning, as I showed off the top around hail being the primary driver for this peril, is the fact that we are perhaps seeing a shift in the number of days in which we might see large hail, so that 2-inch or large hail. And that's a pretty large portion of the country where we're seeing anywhere from 2 to 5 to 10 additional days per year where conditions are definitely ripe for larger hail to occur. So spatial shifts is probably the one takeaway that we're starting to see some emerging signs for this peril. But again, the overall number of reports isn't necessarily changing, though we may be seeing a small signal in some of the noise showing that we may be seeing more reports of events per event, but not more events themselves. And where they're occurring may be also showing some signs of shifting as well. So this is something to pay attention to, but there is perhaps some initial research coming out that gives us a bit more clarity on what the peril is going to look like in the future. In terms of hurricane, this study was a global study, which had the assumption of 2 degrees Celsius global warming for each basin. As I mentioned before, there's not much feeling that we're going to see a dramatic rise in the overall number of storms. But what is changing, we already have data showing this, is that the percentage of hurricanes or hurricane equivalent storms that do form are reaching the highest levels of the intensity scale. So those category 4s and category 5s. So that's, again, a bit concerning. And in fact, that we are seeing warming oceans. That leads to the opportunity for more perhaps northern tracks and components, because storms were able to maintain their tropical characteristics at a higher rate or higher latitude because the conditions in place are more prevalent. But focus on the second half of this chart, where we're seeing the biggest change, and that's in precipitation. Tropical cyclone-induced precipitation. As I mentioned before, you all are now experts on the Clausius Clapeyron equation and what that all means. More heat, more moisture leads to more opportunity for heavier rainfall. And as these storms perhaps slow down at the point of landfall, they don't move very much, they're tapping into very warm ocean water, that leads to very significant rainfall events as well. And a lot of the modeling that's coming out, regardless of RCP or SSP scenario, which is what we call the various emissions scenarios, whether it's the lowest or the highest, all of them are very consistent in showing dramatic more intensities and overall frequency of rainfall on a per event basis for these storms as they do occur. For flooding, again, on a per event basis, heavier precipitations almost everywhere where we do see events happening. Because they're tapping into a warmer, moisture environment, you're going to see heavier rainfall. In terms of water runoff into rivers, it's a bit more, I would say, extensive in parts of Asia, parts of Africa, southern parts of Latin America, and then closer to the poles in North America. Not a huge change, but in the intensity of rain. What's concerning the most in terms of drought risk, parts of Europe, parts of the West, parts of Africa and Australia as well, where you may see more instances of drought in the future. So again, this is a bit more, I would say, dicey in terms of our understanding, but we know that when the events do occur, that there's going to be heavier rains falling and putting more flash flood risk in play, especially as we see more growth in more concrete in a lot of areas where soils, again, may not necessarily be able to absorb the high intensity of the precipitation that falls. In terms of winter weather, I already mentioned sudden stratospheric warming. That's a mouthful. I apologize for that. We have not really seen much change in terms of the occurrences of the polar vortex. The bottom left here is showing a reconstruction of polar vortex events going back a number of years, number of decades. We do have some years where there's more than others, but there's not a definitive signal that's emerging just yet. But we do know that when they do occur, we could get more instances like we saw in February, where essentially the ridge of high pressure gets stuck, doesn't move, and allows more opportunity for this prolonged cold to basically sit and put a severe strain on the infrastructure that's in place. I mentioned the climatological normals off the top. So this is what I've done is I've taken a look at every climatological normal, comparing it to the 20th century average going back to the late 1800s, and you can see quite obviously that in the last 2 instances of our climatological normals, it has really gotten much more obvious in terms of the rate of warming across much of the country, especially out west, here in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, and also in the upper Midwest as well. So certainly concerning when we're talking about heat stress and tying that again with drought risk in many parts of the country as well. For precipitation, I've shown some of this already, but again, this is a bit more tricky in terms of finding obvious signals, but we do know that more heat, more moisture is going to lead to more opportunity for heavier rains. You can see that definitely in the last 2 or 3 instances of the climate normals, it's become more prevalent in parts of the upper Midwest and the Northeast, but nothing that's really striking. Perhaps the fact that it shifted a bit from, say, earlier in the early 20th century, where it was a bit drier in some areas that are now seeing a much heavier rate of precipitation than we've seen in the past. So when you put it all together, I wanted to show this. It's not redundant, I promise. I think everyone, when they think temperature, that it's got to be the max temperatures are driving why it's getting warmer. But in fact, while certainly some areas are seeing hotter temperatures, in the Pacific Northwest again, they saw temperatures that were just so unbelievable. And someone was asking me, why is it unbelievable? And beyond the fact that it was 120 degrees in Canada, which is just hard to believe. But typically when you break an all-time max temperature record, or any type of temperature record, 1 or 2 degrees is a big deal. 5 degrees is a really big deal. Some areas set all-time records by 11 degrees this past June, which is just off the charts. And it's there's so many standard deviations beyond what we would expect that it really is raising a ton of red flags. But with all of that said, what's really driving the overall warming is the minimum temperature, the overnight temperatures, where when the sun goes down, typically that's when the Earth radiates, or everything radiates back up into the atmosphere, and it cools down. But we're not seeing that much cooling anymore. And because of that, and again, going back to the word heat stress, but because temperatures are just not cooling as much, that's leading to this higher overall temperature average, and that's really what's driving most of the temperature warming that we're seeing across the bulk of the United States. So some concluding thoughts. So what do we expect? What are we telling our clients around climate change, and how to be thinking about it? So there's obviously many different types of risk that are in play here. So obviously we've talked about the physical risk, what it's going to do to the stuff that's in harm's way. But from a business standpoint, it's definitely the non-physical which is becoming more important. It's this transition risk. If you have a portfolio where you're investing a lot in fossil fuel-based investments, you're perhaps getting a lot of pressure from your investors to start investing more in clean energy. We've seen it even with, say, ExxonMobil, where there's been activist investors which have gotten themselves several seats on boards of directors, and basically saying, you're going to listen to us and you're going to start doing more clean energy types of investments. So that risk is becoming more important. Litigation, liability. Again, think of what happened in Texas. How many warnings did ERCOT have in 1989 and 2011 that, hey, you need to winterize and modernize your grid to be able to withstand the next time an event like this happens? And they didn't. And now you're seeing significant lawsuits. We've seen it in California with the wildfires in recent years in terms of the utilities, where they didn't take proper precautions to do proper maintenance, and now they're on the hook for a lot of these types of costs. Supply chain, a huge impact. I mean, we're seeing that again, right now within the COVID environment, the shortages of not just lumber. We're seeing it, microchips for vehicles. That's leading to a lot of shortages. So supply chain is becoming a bigger impact. And finally, reputational. A lot of folks and kids that are coming out, and it's funny for me to say kids. I feel like I'm a kid, but I'm not anymore. But kids that are graduating school, they're looking to companies to be able to see whether or not they're taking this topic seriously. And a lot of kids are saying, if they're not doing it, then I'm not going to work there. So reputationally, if you're not seen as doing something to talk about this, Sean mentioned ESG. If you're not really actively engaged in this, it may put a black stain on you if you're not fully being honest around what you're doing around thinking about the risk of climate. Socioeconomic. So I've been over the shifting populations a lot, but there's other issues which are becoming more important. Food insecurity. I keep mentioning the drought out west, but if we have a La Nina that comes back, like the models are suggesting for the rest of the year, we're potentially talking about significant water shortages, drinking water shortages in California, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. And that's a real issue that they are very concerned about. So it's not just parts of Africa or areas where we typically have seen significant challenges around lack of food and lack of access to water. It could legitimately be happening in the U.S. here in the next couple of months if something doesn't change. And also the geopolitical concerns around this. We know that people are always going to be trying to survive and trying to do well for their families. And we see this a lot in the Middle East and other parts of the world where there's more variability in terms of sectarian types of violence, but climate is definitely becoming a bigger deal, and the Pentagon has been putting out a lot of these types of analyses for almost 2 decades at this point. So they recognize this as a big concern that's growing as well. And finally, around the investment piece, you got to spend money to save money, and that is true. There's a lot of studies that have been done that shows that for various perils, that for every $1 you spend, you could potentially save up to $15 to $20 for every type of loss. And that's a big deal. I mean, you look at the federal government, the level of budget, the money that is allocated for natural disaster type of spending. And frankly, every time there's a big event, what do you see on Capitol Hill? You see senators and congressmen that are fighting for more funding because it's beyond what was allocated for every year. So we're talking tens of billions of dollars every year of additional government spending, emergency funds that have to come into play to help folks. And finally, this is a quote that I've been telling people in terms of how we need to be building, how we need to be thinking about building and updating homes and businesses that are already there, retrofitting, is that building to meet the impacts of what we saw yesterday are no longer relevant to what we're going to see tomorrow. If we're assuming that the storms are going to be X% more intense, we assume we're going to see more unusual types of events occurring in areas that haven't seen, for instance, 140 mile per hour winds from a thunderstorm in Iowa. You can't build back a home that's built to withstand 90 mile per hour winds if you just saw an event that had 140 mile per hour winds. So we have to start thinking of how we're going to be building better and smarter in terms of what we're going to be seeing the next day. We know that climate change risk, it's not just short-term, and short-term is basically these individual events that we're seeing today that continues to put pressure on insurers as the losses continue to go up. And obviously property owners trying to figure out what's the smartest area to live, how to live, why they're living there, why they're moving there. The longer term risk, that's when we're starting to talk about impacts to, say, GDP. Things that are really going to put more strains on various economies and perhaps longer term strategic decisions around businesses on how they're going to be thinking about this risk moving forward. Because we know the risk is not going away. Again, mitigation and transfer, again, that's more trying to think of how we're going to be engaging the private and public sectors to invest smarter, become more resilient, adapt to what we know is starting to shift. There was one study that was done that showed that for every 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature, the potential cost to the US GDP could be 1.2% shaved off. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking tens of billions of dollars in terms of impact. And this graphic, I think, is most striking because areas that have the darkest red, unfortunately, are some of the counties that are the poorest. So we know that the folks, and this is not just a U.S. issue, this is everywhere in the world, where the most vulnerable populations tend to be the people that don't have the means to protect themselves, the people that don't have the means to even have enough money to buy insurance, to take out a policy. So we have to start working collaboratively with the public sector groups to really try to engage everyone to make sure no one is left behind in terms of how we're going to be handling this risk moving forward. So climate resilience, this is a phrase that's becoming a bit more popular in a lot of circles. This is sort of a multi-step takeaway here where we're talking about understanding climate science is a really important step one, but the buy-in is the most important. Because I think we all can see, just based on the bottom line, that losses are going up, the risk is going up. Investors are requiring more focus on this. So the buy-in is something that we're really trying to get people to pay more attention to, because this is a topic that, as we know, is just simply not really going to go away. In my final slide, just some final takeaways in terms of extreme weather variability and climate change risk. So we know we have to prepare for more vulnerable exposure. I've been over this a few times already today. People are addicted to risk, essentially, or they want to live in the really attractive properties. Florida, I have the picture of Florida here showing the population densities. It is growing. The risk is going up. It's not just Florida. It's Texas. It's parts of the Midwest. It's parts of the West. Basically anywhere in the country. The areas where we know there's disaster risk, there are people moving there, and we have to start preparing for that and helping people make more smarter decisions. We need to start anticipating the unexpected unknown, the gray swan here. 3 years ago, did anybody forecast a multi-year global pandemic? No, I didn't. We had the pandemic, but the disasters didn't stop, right? So we have these concurrent events happening at the same time. So things that previously we wouldn't have assumed were plausible, we have to perhaps start thinking about these events. These tail events that we didn't necessarily think were going to be happening in our lifetimes are now starting to happen. So these aggregate events are really putting more strain in terms of how we're planning. I know there's been a lot of shortages in terms of assessors being able to get on the ground and help people. It's prolonging the claims process. So we have to start thinking about scenarios that previously seemed ridiculous, but they might not be as ridiculous today, considering the environment that we're currently in. And finally, and my argument is this is perhaps the most important part of all of this, is how we effectively communicate risk to people. Part of my role is after events, we do post-event damage surveys. We've done wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfire, you name it. And the number one thing we hear from folks is, I had no idea my house could flood. I had no idea my house could burn down. I had no idea my house was at risk for a tornado. You know, and to all of us, it's sort of surprising to hear that, right? And you think at your home, you understand that you are living in a flood zone. But a lot of folks just simply don't think about it. And we in the insurance industry sit on so much data. We have so much information, so much to be able to tell our clients. I think we really have a great opportunity to really help make sure that people understand the risk that they have at their own individual location. We know risk is not going away, but I think we really do have a really important voice here to work not just on our own, but also working with government officials at the state, local, federal levels to really make sure that people are making the best decisions moving forward, because it's not only going to help the industry, but it's going to help people. And that's what the industry is all about, right? We're here to help people. We want to help them get back on their feet after a really tough time in their life. And climate risk is scary, but it's not one that we can't overcome and eventually really take good charge of. So with that, thank you very much for your time and attention. And I don't know if we have doing questions or we're just going to go right to an early break. But thank you for your time and invitation to speak today.
Earlier you said that the increase in our temperatures are not mainly due to just the higher temperatures we're seeing. It's because the lows are staying
Correct.
lower, higher than they should have historically been. What is causing that? Is it cloud cover? Because if you think about a desert environment, very hot during the day, and at night it tends to get very cold because everything dissipates. But what's going on that's creating the inability for the surface to give up its heat, so to speak, so that it cools down?
Yeah, great question. A lot of it is what we call the urban heat island effect. As I talked about the population, migrating out of the cities, there's more concrete. That tends to absorb more heat, and a lot of that's not evaporating. It's funny you mentioned the deserts. Death Valley in consecutive days a couple of weeks ago actually set a global all-time daily average temperature record where it was 115 degrees on average. It never got below 100 degrees at any point of the day. So the fact that the overall environment is not changing, and we have one phrase that came into the lexicon in June was heat dome. And basically you get this incredibly warm air mass that just sits and doesn't move. It really it's the same phenomenon that caused the prolonged cold that we had in Texas and much of the U.S. in February. But you get these domes that don't move. There's essentially stagnant air that just sits, and it can just lead to more warmth. And we generally see conditions that are more primed for warmer than cold. So a lot of it's heat island effect. A lot of it's just because the air is just simply warmer. You get an airflow that's coming in, say, from the Gulf of Mexico. Those waters have been running anywhere from 2 to 3 degrees above normal. That air flows in. It's gonna be warmer moisture, and doesn't allow for there to be as much, what we call radiational cooling at night that leads to cooler conditions. So. Yes.
Little off-the-wall question, but
Sure.
What are your thoughts on manipulating the environment? I read a story where I think it was somewhere in the Middle East, UAB or something like that, shocking clouds to produce rainfall in very severe drought-stricken areas.
Yeah, this is a question that comes up a lot. I know China has really driven a lot of this type of research. It works in the very, very, very micro scale, like just in one very small spot. You would have to put so much into the atmosphere to really create sort of its own weather system that it's beyond really anything that we're capable of doing. So I think that it has limited effect. It's possible, but not anything that I think that would truly reduce like a significant drought out west, for instance. It just would take way, way too much to sort of overcome the natural environment. But it's a question that's gaining more steam, but I just don't think we're quite there yet to be able to overcome Mother Nature. She still gets pretty upset.
Well, thank
All
you
right.
very much. I appreciate
you.
your effort. I'm just standing in for John for a little while.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Minutes earlier, thanks to folks being very efficient in their presentations earlier today. We'll start our break right now, but at 10 o'clock, I ask you to come back into here so that the exhibitors can do their drawings, and hopefully some of you can walk away with some really nice gifts. So why don't we take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll bring you back in here at 10 o'clock for those drawings. So thank you. you got to get those people in here. You got to just start. Okay. Okay, folks. Now is the time that we're going to give an opportunity for our exhibitors to announce their prize winners, and hopefully they're in the audience here. If not, I was just telling them that they have a choice. They could either pick another name or go in line again until, because the person may be out getting a drink or using the restroom or something like that. We don't have a particular order. We're just going to bring you up in the order you are here now. Please tell us your name, your company, and then, do your thing, okay? And then hopefully we'll get done before 10:30 when our next speaker starts, and I think we will. So with that, you are the lucky person to start this endeavor. So why don't you come on up?
Hi, my name is Scott Wellham. I'm the marketing coordinator at Merlinos & Associates. We're an actuarial consulting firm out of Atlanta, and we are giving away 3 of the world-famous flying monkeys, Merlinos flying monkeys, to 3 lucky people. You shoot them like a slingshot. When they land, they make that sound. So, without further ado, the 3 winners are Marianne Morosco and David Gauci.
David! I'll take Dave. Oh, he is here.
Okay. There you go.
At your next board meeting, huh? Throw it at him.
And Wendy Howe.
Oh, Wendy. I happen to know Wendy very well, so I'll take Wendy.
Okay.
Okay.
This is for Wendy.
Thank you.
And
Can I have a card? Or do you want?
I'll keep her card.
Okay.
That's all right. All right. So thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming by our booth.
Great, thank you. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Lesser. I'm with Huggins Actuarial Services. We're in Media, Pennsylvania, and thanks for welcoming us to PAMIC this year. We're giving away a $100 American Express gift card that we don't have on site, so we'll have to mail it to the lucky winner. But that winner is Robert Ergel, Jr.
Oh, all right. He was our hero last night.
So,
Could we say Taylor Swift and you can do a dance for us?
so I will give you my business card, and we have your information.
All right.
We'll mail you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Morales. I am with John's Eastern Company. We are an independent adjusting firm. Thank you. 5 foot. As well as a TPA. So we are giving away a $50 Amazon gift card, and the winner of our gift card is William Shupp.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Keep it moving. Good morning, everyone. My name's Amy Tyson. I'm with Consulting Engineers and Scientists. We're forensic engineers and scientists, and we are giving away a bottle of Angel's Envy bourbon.
Uh-oh, who's the lucky winner?
Danielle Morales.
Oh. All right, Danielle. You can just. Thank you. Am I picking?
Yep.
Oh, I'm picking.
Hello, I'm Scott Hines. I'm with Finesse. We provide core systems to insureds.
Can't do that.
That's my burner card that was supposed to start everything. So that's me. I won. I'm giving away $250 worth of Amazon gift cards. It comes in the form of 3 different cards because Kroger's only had $50 and $100 ones. But we have Tina Russell from Bedford Grange. Is she here?
All right, you want to just hold on for a second?
James Doherty.
All right.
All right.
I don't know if they're here, but you can try.
Oh, I already gave them away. That was
Oh, okay, you did. Oh, thank you.
everybody got it.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Clifford?
Thank you.
you, and you're going to do that as well.
Am I going to?
Yep. It's
make sure
completely
there's no-
impartial over here. My name's Clifford Kern. I'm with Epoch, and it's been a distinct pleasure to be here. Thanks very much. And we are giving away a $100 Amazon gift card, and we will email it to you, just so you know. And the lucky winner is Wendy Howe from Grange Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
The fix is in here,
Wendy, we're gonna email it to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Wendy's over there. You want me to pick it?
Yeah, I'm Tommy Halcomb. It's funny, it's just not quite as classy when I don't have the British accent, but we're with United Claims Service. We're independent adjusting company based out of the Carolinas. We've been working in Pennsylvania forever. We're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card that will be emailed, so when you get the email, it's not spam. Just go ahead and open it up. But the winner is Richard Korchner of Briar Creek. Richard? All right. I need to get your email, but all right.
Yeah, you know who he
Thank
is.
you very much.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Ritz. I'm with Town & Country Computer Services, Policy Management, Web Apps for Insurers, and we are giving away a $100 Amazon gift card.
Oh, you want me to do this?
Yeah, I don't want people
My
to...
hand doesn't fit in the jar.
Shake it out.
Uh-oh. If he moves it. It's okay.
Hold on. I need those. And the winner is...
Check the back.
Where's the name? Oh, there we go. Kent D. It's handwritten.
Yes, it's handwritten, and it's in such a nice handwriting we can't read it. But
Briar-
it is really
Briar
nice
Creek
handwriting.
Mutual.
Kent E.
Kent's.
from Briar Creek.
There you go, Kent.
Yeah.
All right.
Shellhammer. Like I said, it's
Sorry,
a really nice
Kent.
handwriting.
That's very nice script to work.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Rock from Mutual Expert. We're giving away a Echo Dot.
Okay. Well, I like the look of that card.
Oh, Robert Gage. I think this is the second or third time in a row that you've won this.
I should have noticed when it was said $2 on it. Okay. I need to.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sean Kopish with Giddings Investigations. We specialize in surveillance and workers' comp investigation. Many have tried and many have failed our putt-putt challenge, but only 2 succeeded. And the winner of this wonderful Wilson putter is Kay Mitzer from Briar Creek. Congratulations, Kay. Yep. If you want, you can always re-gift it. Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Kyle Timmerman with Parkway Advisors. We're an investment manager serving exclusively insurance companies out of Texas. Also provide full statutory accounting. We are giving away an iPad, but the caveat is it only goes to Parkway's website, so take it for what it is. John Marazzo.
All right, John.
Good morning. My name is Dan Smith with Copart Auto Auctions. Really glad to be here to support our mutual insurance customers. And we have a leather duffel bag, and inside are 2 stemless wine glasses and a bottle of wine. So cheers.
Oh my gosh. I'm not that tall, dude.
Robert Ergel Jr.
Twice now.
Juniata Mutual.
Taylor Swift.
Okay, I'll need some help.
Yes.
All right.
As much help as you want.
Okay, so first, hello everybody. After 2 years of working from home, it's nice to be back on the road, but last night was really rough, I'll tell you. Okay, first one. Oh, let me do this first. Jim Gorski from Custard Insurance Adjusters, and we had the Guess the Cash as well as some tickets to the Phillies. So we'll do the tickets first. 4 tickets to the Phillies. Dodgers on August 11th, and if you could pick out of there. Thank you. And that would be John Johnson. Oh, all right. No, there are no tickets.
What kind of gift is that?
That's it will be delivered to your phone because it's the virtual tickets now. You can't bring the paper ones in. So, okay, so we'll figure that out. And the Guess the Cash, we had guesses from 0 to 482, but the winner at a guess of $249, there's actually $243 is, and I had the same problem, Kent, whatever your last name is, because you do write very well. There you go.
Yeah.
Have some cash. Wait, there's more, but I'll get that to you as soon as I wrap it up. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nanette Pirosini. I'm with Wave Work from Home Vintage Experts, and we are giving away an Amazon gift card for $50. And the winner is Wendy Howe from Grange Mutual Fire Insurance. Thank you. We'll mail it to you.
Wendy's buying the first round later today, okay?
We will mail it to you. We'll send it to email. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, hello. I'm Ashley Anahosa from ExamWorks. We do IMEs, bill review, and peer review. So today we're giving away the Speedo backpack, and then inside is some more cookies and goodies for you guys too. So David Goucher? Gouchy. Shoot, okay.
Ooh, a Goucher.
I practiced, sorry. Goodwill Mutual.
How fancy.
Okay, there you are. It did sound a little fancy, but okay, thank you.
And last, but definitely not least, please.
Jerry Powers with Simple Solve Software, and we are giving away 2 glasses and a bottle of single malt scotch. So, and I have partied with you people, so hopefully it'll make it out of the room. So the winner is Julian Arbuckle.
I don't know if Julian's here. Oh, he is. Good.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes the drawing. Our next speaker will start at 10:30, I believe. So we have another 15 minutes or so to take a break, thank people out there for their gifts, and get a refreshment or so for yourself. We'll see you here at 10:30. Thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to get started pretty soon, in about 2 minutes with our next speaker. So if I can ask you to get your seats and we can get ready. I do have one announcement that I have to make. Just by a show of hands, how many people are golfing this afternoon in the room? Okay, really not a whole lot that are sitting here. But what I want to do is let you know that there is a luncheon for people that are not golfing, and that luncheon is going to be over there by the fountain. But if you're golfing, there will be a box lunch at the golf course. So please don't eat over there and take advantage of the box lunch. Also, if you're not driving to the golf course later, it's the Hershey Country Club, not too far away. There will be 2 shuttle buses leaving at about 12:15 from the lobby area. So you have time between the end of this session and 12:15 to get yourself checked out and get your golf attire on if you need to change and that kind of thing. So that's guess what? That's the last announcement I have to make today, and I get to turn it back over to John, who will be making his last set of announcements, other than maybe saying goodbye at the end, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Goodbye's it. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Ron. Just a couple other housekeeping items that I want to make sure I get out of the way. Please be on the lookout for a survey. There's going to be a survey emailed to you after the conference. Also, the presentation materials will be available on the PAMIC website as well. So be on the lookout for that as well. So it's with a lot of my great pleasure that I get to introduce our very last speaker, and I think you'll really find his presentation is really informative. He's a great presenter as well. Bill Rotori, it's been a long week. Rotatory. I'm sorry, Bill. I just botched that name big time. But Bill is the chairman and CEO of NEAM, so New England Asset Management, and a member of the firm's policy committee. He joined the firm as vice president in 2000, was made president in 2010, and became CEO in 2014. Prior to joining the firm, Bill was a senior vice president of the portfolio management group at Conning Asset Management, and previously held various positions within the investment group and asset management division at Travelers Insurance Company. Bill is a CFA charter holder and a member of the Hartford Society of Financial Analysts. A graduate of Georgetown University, Bill also holds an MBA in finance from the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. And except for a two-year period when pursuing an MBA from 1988 through 1990, he has been employed in the investment industry since 1986. So please welcome Bill Rotori. Thank you.
Thanks, John. No worries. Thank you. Yeah. We just do a quick sound check. Everybody hear me okay? All right, very good. Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here, great to be out of my basement after 18 months of sitting by myself. So good to see three-dimensional people and everything like that. And excited to talk to you this morning about the economy and capital markets. It's a really unusual situation. You can tell by the title of my presentation, The COVID Recovery and the Path to Normal. Things are not normal, and there's a lot of unusual circumstances out there in terms of labor markets, inflation, monetary policy, capital markets, and I want to get into all that. But I do want to start in a different place. I want to start in the art market. And the reason we sometimes look at the art market is there are signs of speculative excess you can see in the auction market. And when the Fed's pushing liquidity into every nook and cranny, sometimes it shows up in funny places. So let me just quick show of hands. Anybody hear the name, know the name Mike Winkleman? That stuns the room every time. Mike Winkleman, digital artist. He also goes by the name of Beeple. And Mike Winkleman, in May 1st, 2007, posted a piece of digital art online, and then did that with a new piece of digital art every day for 5,000 days. And over 13 and a half years, created this collage called every days, the first 5,000 days. And it's a piece of digital art. So you can go online, grab it, look at it. I did it and put it right in the PowerPoint presentation. He auctioned off the non-fungible token for this digital image, which is the blockchain entry, which gives the authenticity of ownership of that digital image at Christie's, and it sold for $69 million. So, you know, I don't, it sounds a little excessive to me. I'm more of a dogs playing poker guy, but that's all right. But not even my favorite example. This is my favorite example. Lo Sono. It's a work of art from an Italian sculpture artist named Salvatore Garau, and it's an immaterial sculpture. It takes, getting these words out is even hard. It takes its form from its nothingness, according to the artist, and you need to activate the power of your imagination to enable the sculpture. It was sold under the conditions that it had to be exhibited in a private home, in a 5-foot by 5-foot space, unobstructed, because it's the density of thought in that precise space that creates the image. It sold for $18,000. You know, you can't make some of that stuff up, but nonetheless, and you guys are all scratching your head. Yeah, there's nothing to it. It's, you know, there was nothing. Anyway, couple of signs from the art market. You know, I'm not saying there's trouble ahead, but a couple of things we should be thinking about. So anyway, what I want to cover today, I want to cover the economic outlook, talk about labor markets, talk about inflation, what that all means for monetary policy. The Fed is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and they're throwing their weight around. What that means for rates and markets, and love to make this a conversation, so hopefully you have some time for some Q&A. Let's start with the economy. And the really unique thing about this economic cycle is that this 3.5% decline, annual decline in GDP is a record. Post-World War II, that's the single largest annual decline in economic activity that we've experienced in the US. The good news is we're going to set a record in the other direction this year. In 2021, we'll have the single largest annual increase in economic activity, probably on the order of, it'll probably be a 7% number in the US economy this year over year economic growth. And that's the uniqueness that's causing a lot of the distortions. It's this dramatic down and significant up that is really giving us some difficulties in certain things, and we'll get into that. But where are we now in that down and up? And we've said for some time that the path and pace of economic activity is attached at the hip with the virus. And happily, we've made, as we all know, significant progress in vaccination rates. So we're up to, I think it's 58% of the US population has at least one dose. 50% has both doses or are fully vaccinated. So that has allowed people to go out and do things. You know, and we always said, unless and until people can go outside and go out to dinner and do things they want to do without catching something's going to kill them, you know, they're going to shorten up on the bat. And that equation has changed, and we're seeing a dramatic reopening of the economy, and we're in a boom phase right now. Second quarter GDP year over year was 13% growth. And in the largest economy in the world, that's a real wonder. And where are we in that phase? These are a couple of ways we look at these. Are some high frequency numbers that we look at to measure kind of where we are. The way you read this is the green line is open table seated diners. So this is in restaurant dining. The blue line is TSA checkpoint travelers. And what we're doing is we're comparing activity in a given day in 2021 to the exact same day in 2019. And what you can see is that you look at the green line, open table seated diners, we're basically right up to pre-pandemic levels. TSA checkpoint travelers, we're at about 80%. This morning's number was 85%. What we've seen is domestic leisure travel, basically back to normal, back to pre-pandemic levels. Domestic business travel running about 65, 70% of pre-pandemic. International travel still really depressed, still down below 20%. But nonetheless, you know, we're getting back to normal, and it's showing up. We're, you know, full crowds at Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park, Disneyland's full, the whole bit. And what's driving it? It's pretty obvious, right? Pent-up demand, powerful combination of pent-up demand and a lot of dry powder. And this is the dry powder. Consumer net worth, we set a record in consumer net worth, over $120 trillion, yes, trillion with a T. And that's driven by the increase in stock prices, increase in housing prices, consumer balance sheets really in good shape, a lot of dry powder, and we're seeing that revenge spend, as we call it. You know, savings rate, which averages about 8% in this country historically, spiked up during the pandemic. People choked up on the bat, right? Hey, now we're spending down. People are spending down that savings rate, and it's showing up in sales across the board. These are retail sales and durable goods, both up about 10, 15, durable goods up about 30% year over year. So people are spending again, and we're in the boom phase. And it's not just consumers, it's businesses. So this is capital investment, total CapEx year over year, running up about 10, 12%. Businesses perceive this opportunity as well. We've got a good time to be selling things. Prices are up. Rates are low. They can borrow at friendly levels and invest and expand productive capacity, and we're seeing that across the board. And you know, government's in on the action as well. You know, if you think about your old Econ 101 textbook, GDP, what is, you know, C plus I plus G plus XN, right? You know, consumers going gangbusters. Investment spending is very strong, and we're setting records on the government side. When you look at this, what we did is we tried to put some context around it. Green bars are the blue bars are the absolute dollars of expenditure, fiscal relief. And this is, we compared it to the global financial crisis. So in the global financial crisis, we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We had TARP. We spent about $1.7 trillion. It was about 10% of GDP. To date, we've spent about $5 trillion in fiscal relief and fiscal stimulus, driven largely by the CARES Act. That was about 25% of GDP. And if the American Family Plan, American Jobs Plan, who knows what gets passed, we could be, though, near $10 trillion in spend, nearly 43, 44% of GDP at the end of the day in terms of pandemic relief, pandemic stimulus. So the G part of the equation, very strong as well. And that's why we're ending up with 13% growth rates that we're seeing quarter over quarter, or year over year, excuse me, in the second quarter. But here's the thing. We're at that peak in economic activity. This is Q2 21, as you see here, and we're going to be in a decelerating trend. We're going to get moderating, reopening trade, right? The fiscal stimulus is going to eventually fade. The stimulus checks are going to no longer around. We're going to get the foreclosure moratorium went away this past weekend. The federal unemployment assistance checks end of August. So. And we're going to be moving back towards normal, towards our trend line growth number, which is more like 2.5%. So we're in a decelerating mode as we speak now. And some of the turbulence that's going to be created is the Fed's trying to get out of the stimulus game at the same time. And so that's some of the unique circumstance we're going to be dealing with, and it's showing up in various places. Let's start with a few things. Let's look at some of those key drivers and how they're affected by this sort of economic activity. Let's look at the labor markets. We all know we've done a pretty good job in terms of bringing people back into the workforce, bringing people back to work. We've added 18 million jobs in the last 18 months. The unemployment rate, which peaked, the blue line is the U3, the green is the U6, the full number. We peaked at about 14% unemployment rate. We're down below 6. The U6 peaked at about 23%. We're down below 10%. So we've had a lot of job growth. But we still have 7.2 million fewer Americans at work today than we did in February of 2020. And that's about 50-50, people leaving the labor force, people unemployed. Another component of today's labor market, the unemployment rate is determined by a survey, right? A monthly survey, and then they ask you, hey, you want a series of questions. They determine whether you're in the labor force, whether you're unemployed, employed, what have you. And one of the questions they ask if you're unemployed is, are you temporarily unemployed? And during the crisis, it was, 80%. Oh yeah, I got a job, no problem. I'm temporarily unemployed. It'll get back to normal. And over time, what happened? Not so much. So we're down to 20% saying they're temporarily unemployed. So 80% permanently unemployed. That's a pretty big number. That's 7.5 million people. And you look at the duration of unemployment, I think the longest category is 27 weeks and up. It's about 42%, and that's an all-time high. So some interesting, cross currents there in the markets, in the labor market. The biggest of which is this. At the same time, when unemployment's a bit elevated, we've got this long-term unemployed, right? Highest job opening rate ever. So 9.2 million job openings, and as a percentage of total employment, which is what this figure is, like 6 and change percent, all-time high. So clearly, there's a mismatch here, right? We got people on the sidelines, and we've got job openings. Now, clearly, it's a result of, okay, we've got some federal unemployment assistance that makes it pretty economic to stay on the sidelines. A lot of people, going back to work in some high-density areas, it might not be that safe. Child care, other things like that, complicating the situation. And you can see it in where the COVID job losses are. Where do the job losses occur? 75%, over 75% of them, private sector service jobs. And you can see the biggest categories over here on the right, and they're the obvious ones. Accommodation, food services, arts, entertainment, temporary help, transit, ground passenger, department stores, clothing and specialty retail. It's those high density, high touch areas, and the most impacted by the coronavirus. Plus, we've got aging demographics, as we all know, right? So the portion of the civilian non-institutional population that is retirement eligible keeps growing every year. And one of the effects of the pandemic is, a lot of people have chosen, I've accelerated that choice. I'm retired now. I'm no longer in the workforce. And, that's another factor here. Can those people be drawn back into the workforce? Because right now we stand at multi-decade lows in two important stats. This is the blue line, labor force participation. So this is, you take that 260 million people of civilian non-institutional population. How many of them are in the labor force? We're at multi-decade low. It's like 61.5. This is the employment population ratio. What percentage of that 260 million people have a job? And that's at multi-decade lows. And this is one of the things the Fed is focused on. When you hear the catchphrase, full and inclusive employment, they're talking about this. This is one of the things they're talking about. They don't want to just see that unemployment rate come down. They want to draw people back into the labor force. And just to give you the statistic, we did the math the other day. Fed talks about this full and inclusive unemployment. If you want to get back to 3.5% unemployment rate and 63% labor force participation rate, you want to get back to that in a 12-month period, you're going to need 750,000 new jobs every month for the next 12 months. So, we're having some big numbers like that, but that's kind of a good baseline to keep in your mind as we go forward. You need about that number of jobs to get back to what the Fed's looking to do. So some unusual circumstances in the labor market. How about inflation? Big thing on everybody's mind today. And there are some unusual circumstances as it relates to inflation. Let's start with some context. Who's the OG? Who's the original inflation slayer? Paul Volcker. This is right here, Senate testimony, smoking a big cigar. Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve, late 1970s, inflation's running 10% a year and accelerating. He calls emergency FOMC meeting October 1979, says, that's it, we're going to take care of inflation. Proceeds to take Fed funds to 20%. Inflation crests at 14%, throws the economy into a double-dip recession that lasts 3 years. But he was very successful. He's who we owe. He ushered in an era of low and stable inflation and inflation expectations. Now, interestingly enough, he firmly established the Fed's inflation-fighting credentials, their independence. You imagine today, Chair Powell trying to do this? There'd be riots. But nonetheless, this is what he did. And for 40, 50 years since then, we've had nothing but stable prices and stable and well-anchored inflation expectations. Sure, globalization helped. a couple of the productivity improving technology, all these things that contributed to that disinflationary environment. But really it was that Saturday Night Massacre from Paul Volcker that was the catalyst for this whole thing. And what are we seeing today? Well, we're seeing that calm, benign inflation environment get upended. These are core inflation measures. So we're taking out food and energy. Pick your poison. It's core CPI, core PCE, core PPI. They're all running 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% year over year. And that's different than we're used to, right? And it's causing some concern. What's the source of it? Well, it gets back to the nature of our this particular economic recovery. We've had a sharp down and a sharp up, right? So think about what happens. We go into it, we actually went into the pandemic reasonably low inventory levels, right? Remember the phase one trade deal with China, January 15th, 2020, remember that? Like, hey, these tariffs are gonna come off, so manufacturers and producers are like, hey, we don't have to buy it right now, we'll wait till a lower tariff environment. So we go into the situation with low inventories, then what happens? The bottom falls out of demand in the pandemic. Suppliers obviously, respond rationally and reduce productive capacity, mothball some things, and all of a sudden the supply side gets completely caught flat-footed with this booming reopening trade. And we're seeing it, and this is inventory to sales ratios. We can't keep enough product markets supplied to keep up with sales. And a couple of stories just to bring this home, that things we're all experiencing. These are two markets in particular. That's used vehicles on the left, that's home prices on the right. And both of them seeing 10, 12, 13% kind of year over year price increases. You think about what happened in the vehicle market. For a number of years, from 2017 right before the pandemic, the auto industry had been working down inventory levels. Inventory to sales in the auto industry went from 3.5 to like 1.6 just prior to the pandemic, in the 3 years prior to the pandemic. And then, what happens? The bottom falls out of the market. The producer, they shut down production in the auto space, and all of a sudden we've got this booming demand. We've got urban flight. We've got lack of trust of taking public transportation, and the supply side can't keep up. Now we're kind of blaming it on chip shortages, and that's a big part of it, but they got caught flat-footed, and this is what you see. It's a recipe for higher prices, and it's not going away anytime soon. Similarly, in the housing market, inventory of single-family homes peaked in 2007 at like 3.5 million units. It was worked down to about 1 million units just prior to the pandemic. Then what happens? Obviously, pandemic, demand collapses. You have production cuts in lumber industry. You have product shortages, and then all of a sudden, again, reopening, household formations, booming demand for, hey, I want to get out of the city. I want to go live in the suburbs. I want my own single-family house. And you got a recipe for trouble, right? And so we're seeing how now. The interesting thing is, and you think about inflation, it is a supply-demand imbalance game, right? And it's a very dynamic, all these markets are dynamic markets, and we're already seeing the supply side response. So Intel, Taiwan Semi, and Samsung have committed to $90 billion in investment this year in 2021 to expand productive capacity of chips. We're seeing it in lumber markets. Lumber production is way up, and we're already seeing lumber prices roll over. So there's a supply side response here that's coming, that's going to restore balance to these markets, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take a period of quarters, and it's going to work its way through various product markets in different rates. Oil obviously being a big one. That the oil story is an easy one, right? Prior to the pandemic, we were hovering about $60-odd a barrel in West Texas Intermediate. The pandemic comes, and we had basically, we're not getting on planes, we're not driving cars, the demand for oil and oil products just completely goes away. And what happens? The obvious rational response, the supply side, okay, we're not drilling holes in the ground anymore, we're going to cap these wells, things like that. So we end up in a period of, dramatic oversupply of oil, Oil prices collapsed to the high teens. Remember, it actually went negative for a couple days. Remember that? It went to minus 38 in WTI. But of course, now you got booming demand again. The demand side's coming back. And OPEC Plus is kind of managing things here, saying, hey, you know what, we'll give a little bit, but we're now in a dramatically over-demanded situation to the tune of 2 million barrels a day. West Texas Intermediate has gone from $18 a barrel to mid-70s. And again, though, supply side response, we're restoring equilibrium in that market. It's going to work its way through inflation numbers, but nonetheless, it's some balance coming. And to get a sense for where we might go with inflation, let's look at the big components. This is CPI. These are the size of the bubble gives you obviously the percentage that element is in the CPI calculation. And what we're likely to see, commodities ex food and energy. This is new and used vehicle prices, apparel, appliances, things like that. Those are some markets that are experiencing that supply side response. We're likely to see that migrate a little left over a period of quarters. Energy, obviously, over on the far right, we're going to see that number come off the boil. The big one is shelter, and it's 30% of the CPI calculation. And it's not house prices. This is the confusing part. The way the BLS does it is housing, housing they consider a capital investment. So the way, and the CPI is meant to be purchases of goods and services. So they turn it into a rent figure, and it's survey-based. So the question they ask, and I'll ask all of you because my reaction to it was interesting, is if you could rent your home, what would it rent for unfurnished without utilities? And as a homeowner, it's a lot of this, right? I don't really know. I'm not in the business of renting my house. And so it tends to put some stability in that number. And it's the single biggest component of CPI. Now, those house prices are going to flow through. The owners aren't stupid. They see what's going on. So you'll see some increase there. But nonetheless, there's some pretty good ballast in CPI figures coming from that shelter index that'll probably keep things in check more than we expect. But the risk is what? The wage price spiral, that's what everyone's concerned about. Prices go up. Consumers can't afford to buy those products, so wages have to go up. Well, they pass through wages in terms of higher prices, and the whole thing's a big flywheel. And that's what the Fed is, they're playing with that fire. And to date, they've been pretty successful because inflation expectations have stayed well anchored. And I can tell you, you can tell how important this is to the Fed because they created a new index. So this is the new index from the Fed. It's called the Common Inflation Expectations Index. It aggregates like 20 surveys on inflation expectations, so you get a good broad-based survey number. And it's reasonably well behaved right now. But if this is their concern, if this becomes unanchored, they're going to have to do something because they don't have, they've got a dual mandate here, and they got to keep track of what's going on in the inflation markets. So inflation, another big one we're dealing with. Let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla, monetary policy. Because as I mentioned before, this is not your father's Fed. This is not Paul Volcker, smoke-filled room. This is a different kind of Fed. It's more like this, right? This is we want to keep the party going Fed. That's Jay Powell on the left, Christine Lagarde on the right. You think about what they're doing, it's really surprising. Like if you came down from Mars and looked at the U.S. economy and said, I see an economy growing at 13% a year, unemployment's below 6%, inflation's running 4 or 5%, where would you put Fed funds? You wouldn't put it at zero, and you wouldn't think they'd be buying $120 billion in financial assets every month, but that's exactly what they're doing. And the Fed's had a busy pandemic. Think about what the Fed's done. Pandemic hits, Fed establishes 9 new credit facilities to deal with market liquidity. They take Fed funds immediately to zero, and they initiate unlimited quantitative easing at the pace of $120 billion a month, $80 billion of treasuries, $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities. They expanded the balance sheet in 6 months, what it took them 6 years to do after the global financial crisis. And here's where we are today, $8.1 trillion in Fed balance sheet. This is an uneconomic buyer in markets that's tough to avoid, right? They're in there every day, every month, no matter what. I don't care what the price is. I'm buying $80 billion of treasuries, and my balance sheet's not just reinvesting, right? Growing the balance sheet by $80 billion a month in the treasury market, $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities. And they've, the Fed, listening to the Fed is always fun because they develop their own terminology to give them covering fire for what they're doing, right? So they've established, under the cover of darkness last year, Jackson Hole, they come out with a new regime. All of a sudden, a new regime, what's this? Flexible average inflation targeting regime. Oh, okay, that's Fed speak for, yeah, I know we want to see 2% in inflation, that's our number, but if it undershoots for a period of time, right, in which it has, this is the Fed's favorite inflation measure, core PCE, versus their target. And they've undershot for, 48 of 49 quarters. And they say, hey, if we undershoot for a period of time, we can let it overshoot because we're still going to average 2% over time. So they've, developed a new regime to give themselves covering fire to let, in their words, let it run hot. Let inflation run above 2% so we can see if the job market heals itself. And that's what the Fed's doing right now. And our best guess at what the Fed's likely to do here, because the pressure's building on the Fed. They're in a highly accommodative situation, and the economy's booming. Yeah, I know we've got some, like we talked about the labor shortages and some things like that, but the Fed's going to have to do something. And where are they in their timeline? We've moved from what? The Fed talks about tapering to the point where they're now talking about tapering, right? And then we'll get an announcement that here's what how we're going to taper. And then they're going to start to taper. And then a year later, we can raise interest rates. That's basically their timeline. And here's where we'll probably get an announcement fourth quarter, that, hey, we're going to start to taper next spring. But think about what that means. The Fed balance sheet every month still is growing by $120 billion. And all they're saying with tapering is, it's not going to grow by 120. I don't know, I'm making numbers up. It's going to grow by 80, or then it's going to grow by 60. But it's still growing. They still have that uneconomic buyer in there just buying away. So the Fed's going to stay in a highly accommodative position as long as they can, and as long as inflation, which in their terms is transitory, they see signs of it rolling over, they're going to be patient here in terms of raising rates. All right, what does all that mean for rates and capital markets and what we can expect here? And this is where I hate this part because I'm always disappointing the room, right? It's like everyone wants to hear, hey, can we invest at 3 and 4% again? Like, the answer is probably not. This is our interest rate for. Let's start with Treasury yields. This is our forecast. The blue line is the dark blue line is where we are today. We think there'll be some modest upward pressure on rates. There should be. The same thing. If you did that same Mars experiment, rates shouldn't be 120 in the 10-year. They should be higher. But I hate to say it, we've got distorted markets, and the Fed's been distorting markets. We think we'll get some modest upward pressure as this plays through, but not a lot. I think we'll get some relief towards 2% on the 10-year, but not a lot more than that. And this part of the reason that we're not expecting more is that 800-pound gorilla. And look what the Fed's doing. Fed is buying, on average, 80% of the net issuance. 80%. And they own 25% of the outstandings. So when you're that kind of size in the market, it's tough to see it really getting unhinged or really seeing significant increases in rates when they have that sort of power in markets. And it's not just them. You hate to say it, but 120 in the 10-year doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot better than what you get overseas. And so your alternatives, hey, the 120 on the 10-year U.S. Treasury denominated in dollars, what are my alternatives if I'm a global investor? Well, I can buy the German Bund at minus 11, denominated in euro. I can buy JGB's bank in Japan at about 8 basis points, denominated in yen. We're still the prettiest girl in the dance, or whatever expression you want to use. And global flows will support the back end of the U.S. Treasury curve and prevent a lot more upward movement than what we're expecting. And this is another, another reason the Fed has room is the ECB and the Bank of Japan are further down the road. They own more of their markets. I think the ECB owns about 35% of the outstanding sovereign debt market in Europe. The Bank of Japan owns nearly 50% of the outstanding JGB market. So you talk about a distorted market, the Bank of Japan is going to tell you what the 10-year yields in Japan. So the Fed's got covering fire here, and they've got global partners. How about spreads? You can get yield in a couple of ways, right? We can get yield from base treasury yields or that incremental spread we earn for owning non-treasury securities like corporate bonds. How's that? Well, unfortunately, it's not much of a different picture. These are single A rated corporate bond spreads. We have at NEAM every night we price 2 million securities every evening, and so we can calculate exactly this. Hey, what are the spread levels in aggregate in markets over treasuries? And our database goes back to the mid-1990s. This is 5-year single A corporate bond spreads. We're basically at historic lows. Same thing for triple Bs. So the bottom end of the investment grade spectrum, similar very low level, and just not a lot of compensation for that risk. High yield. Yeah, a little better, a little more room left in the high yield market, but still well below historical averages. So the pricing of risk in credit is at or near historic lows, particularly across the investment grade market. And let me just, I'll make the opportunity, there's not huge opportunities in fixed income markets, right? When the 10 years at 120 and spreads are where they are, well inside of 100 basis points, not a ton of opportunity. But there are certain markets that the lack of relative value is more pronounced. And we would argue that the corporate bond market is that market. Because not only are spreads at all-time tights, the composition of that market is as risky as it's ever been. So this is a graph that just shows the percentage of triple Bs and the percentage of triple B minuses, the weakest of the investment grade space, in the index. So this index, which is at historic tights, has the most triple B and triple B minuses in it in history. So that trade-off in corporates in our mind is pretty weak. And this is not to get too geeky on you, this is a margin of error measure that's used. And what you do is you take the spread that's available, you divide it by the duration of that instrument. It tells you, okay, how much can the spread widen before I'm just better off owning the treasury security? And it's a measure of margin for error we use in the industry. And it's basically at an all-time low. This is the lowest spread cushion we've had on record since 2000. And to give you I'd say, one piece of relative value, good news is that there are other sectors out there. The corporate bond market, it happens to be the largest investment grade market, and it attracts a lot of the flows, but it's not the only market. There's the taxable municipal market, the tax exempt market, the structured securities market, and we would say if there's ever been a time to diversify out of the corporate bond market, now's a pretty good time. And here's just a simplified example. The 3 dots on the page. First is the single A rated corporate bond. If you bought it today, you get about 1.23% in yield. Well, what you can do is you can buy a high quality structured security, and we just picked a CLO, but it could be a number of other things. You'd earn about a 109, a double A taxable municipal, earn about 254 out the curve. And you could combine those two and obviously get to a point, this is just a straight line, well above 123. You're upgrading in quality, you're diversifying out of corporate event risk, right? Corporations tend to buy each other. When they buy each other, that's not good news for bondholders generally. Higher spread, higher yield. So if there's ever been a time to diversify away from the corporate bond market, now's the time. And the other thing the Fed's done is it's kept volatility very low. So we've got compressed volatility environment. And equity market valuations are pretty full right now. So kind of what's not to like, right? It's full, low yields, not a lot of compensation for risk, low volatility, full equity market valuations. It's a very uncomfortable place from an investment perspective right now. And I'll talk about what I think that means in conclusions and strategy in a minute here. So, conclusions. Strong GDP market right now. We're at the peak of it. We'll probably be closer to that 5 to 7, closer to the high end of that 7% range in 2021, but decelerating from there. Labor market should continue to improve. We'll see the unemployment rate continue to drop here. We think those inflation pressures are going to persist. Supply-demand imbalances will be restored, but it's going to take a period of quarters here. And that just adds to this low yield environment, right? Real yields are highly negative across the yield curve. Treasury rates could drift modestly higher. Large cap stocks in aggregate, pretty overvalued by historical standards. And we've got not so free markets. We've got the Fed on the scale, the Fed with their finger on the scale, and that makes it even tougher. So what do? You know, I was going to joke and just say, it's a third Bitcoin, a third meme stocks, and a third SPACs, and you're good to go. You know, I think what you want to do is you want to optimize your use of risk assets. That's a fancy way of saying, you know, there's not a lot of financial return expected from fixed income. It's pretty obvious. So to the extent you have a bucket for risk assets, you should be looking at that. What is that capacity for risk? To the extent you get some volatility, that's a good time to use, it'd be a likely good time to use that allocation. Within the fixed income portfolio, it's a food fight. You know, and every basis point of yield counts. We think you gotta, every time you go to market, for the duration and credit risk you're assuming, get paid as much as you can in terms of spread and yield. That likely means the structured securities and taxable municipal markets over the corporate bond market, as I demonstrated. High quality issuers. You know, this is, to me, it's a risk management market. When the market is indiscriminately pricing risk and you have two credits that are very different from a creditworthiness perspective being priced the same, there's no reason to own that risk. So it's a great risk management market to the extent there's opportunities, better off selling in some instances and moving into higher quality instruments. And be proactive in that process. And you want to be prepared to take advantage of volatility. That's what this market is likely to produce, if you think where we are. You know, decelerating growth, Fed trying to remove the punch bowl when valuations are high. That's a recipe for, there's going to be some turbulence here. And so I'm going to close. I started with a picture. I'm going to close with a picture. I got permission. This is my wife. This is a recent fly fishing trip. That's her nice 20-inch striper she caught. I was skunked, but nonetheless, the instructions from the guide when we were fishing in the York River in Maine, and the York River flows out into the ocean. And he said, look, here's our strategy, basically. Like, as the river's flowing out and it meets the current from the ocean, you get these eddies, you get this turbulence, mostly around the rocks. That's where you want to put your fly. That's where the action is. That's where the fish are. So get your fly into the turbulence. And, you know, granted, you got to get the boat close to the rocks, so it's a little risky. But this is the best metaphor I got for you guys. Like, you know, fish the turbulence. You know, as the turbulence comes, it's going to come. That's where the opportunities are going to be. And we got the same situation. You know, the current's coming out from the Fed eventually. The rate of growth in the economic activity is going to decelerate here. It's not going to be a smooth. They're not going to stick the landing. It's not going to be smooth. And there's going to be some turbulence created, and be prepared to put your fly where you need to put your fly. So I realize I went through that very quickly, but that's what I had for you today. I'd love to turn this into a conversation. Just, you know, happy to take any questions. Yeah.
How sensitive are all of those factors we talked about to the ultimate unemployment rate? So let's say we really do get these 7 million people back to work a little bit faster than we think, and everybody believes that once the stimulus, you know, checks go away in August, we're just going to see everybody going back to work, or a good portion of that. How sensitive are these to that particular?
Yeah, we're going to find out. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think, you know, that's the Fed's hope, right? The Fed's hope is, okay, the unemployment assistance checks end, everybody goes back to school, back to work, child care issues are solved, and, you know, everybody goes back to kind of normal. And we pull these people back into the labor force, and they're able to take away the stimulus. I think, you know, these factors are highly sensitive to that little dynamic. And I don't think it's going to be smooth. It's going to be, I think people have made some decisions that, like, changing behavior permanently based on what's happened in the pandemic.
Because earlier you said that there's a lot of money going into increasing capacity for production.
There is, yeah.
Right. So they're obviously hoping there's going to be more buyers and new money coming into those markets to sustain that investment.
Yeah.
The only place it can come from is where people aren't spending. Where people are not currently spending, they have to start spending.
Well, they're seeing, in cross-product markets, they're seeing higher prices. So it's an attractive opportunity right now as it is, right? And they're having trouble meeting demand. Inventory to sales ratios are dragging along the bottom. So there's enough opportunity to justify that. Plus, I think there is a sense that that's, it's productivity improving enhancement, because they don't want to count on that labor shortage. If that's the key piece of the equation, that's a little more problematic. But if I can do it without a lot of people, I can meet that demand. That's a nice opportunity. Sure.
So when you think about full employment, obviously we have retired baby boomer population, but there's also a new movement called the financial independence, retire early. So that may take people out of the labor market earlier. And right now, the stock market's up. Some people are in cryptos and some of that. A lot of people are making it big right now. So any take on what the FIRE movement in combination with the baby boomer retirement can do for levels of available people to employ?
Before you answer, could you sort of repeat the question for the other side?
Yeah. Hopefully everybody heard that. It basically was aging demographics plus a new movement to retire early with people that have had some success, and what that might mean for the pool of labor. Is that fair? I think that's another pandemic consequence that we're likely to see. I don't think the Fed's going to be successful at getting that labor force participation rate back up to that 63%. I think people have made some decisions that that's a permanent move. Now, it's going to bounce off the bottom. We're not going to stay at 61.5, but I don't think it gets back all the way to 63. And that's not just a U.S. phenomenon. The labor force participation in the developed world has been in decline because of aging demographics. And we were already seeing working age population, absolute numbers, working age population in decline in Japan, in China, across parts of Europe. Working age population in the U.S. is still growing, but that is a cap on ultimate economic trend growth as a consequence of things. Sure.
The administration like to raise corporate tax rates, but they don't want to do it without global collaboration. So what do you think is going to happen with tax reform?
Yeah, that's another hot topic I didn't even really talk about, because that could put a dent in things, right? If we have some unfavorable tax policy, from a business perspective, I think it's hard enough to agree on taxes in this country, let alone agreeing across the developed world. So I don't know. We'll see. I think that's going to be awfully hard to do. But I think there will be some, higher taxes coming. We're going to have that argument in the next quarter, right? They're going to talk about raising taxes to try and pay for the American Family Plan. Sure.
I think what's related to what's been said is, for the past few months, you've had a consumer price index at 4 to 6%, and it's continuing to go up, and eventually that, in my mind, will help to drive that labor participation. And I don't know if you can speak to that. Also, the fiscal spending is just astronomical, and our gross domestic product, I think it's about 8% is servicing our debt. It's going to go up to 10 in the next decade or so.
Oh, it's higher than that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe higher.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know if you could speak to maybe those two aspects, and then business is doing great. Our customers are doing great right now, but how much of that is artificial as opposed to is it going to flame out?
Yeah, and you hit on some really just good issues that are tough to really forecast. I would say that starting with that kind of the last one, the sugar high, right? How much of this is artificial? There's a fair amount of that. I would say the early days of spend is somewhat artificial, if you will. But there's a lot of pent up demand and a lot of dry powder. So I think some of that is got some legs to it, meaning, we're going to see 8% GDP growth second half of the year. That's a pretty big number. So I think that's, we're obviously declining towards that trend line growth, which is more like 2.5, but I think we're going to persist at above trend for a while here. As far as government debt goes, I think that's a huge consequence of the pandemic. It's global. It's a global phenomenon. We'll set 2 records this year. Debt to GDP in the U.S. will be as high as it's ever been since World War II, and net interest expense will be, as a percentage of GDP, will be as low as it's been in 50 years. And it's because of what the Fed's doing. And I think that's one of the consequence of this is that coordination between central banks and governments. They need each other. Like if the Fed stepped out of the way completely and we let the 10-year go to whatever, 4%, that would ruin we're already talking about a $3 trillion deficit. That would ruin the fiscal semblance of reality in the U.S. and in Japan. That's why Japan's been stepping on their market for 20 years. Same thing in the Eurozone. That's why, the whole Paul Volcker thing. I just don't think that central banker exists today. They don't have that sort of independence, so I don't think we'll see that happen. I think it'll be more of a managed market that way. So, yeah.
You see any push back from just-in-time inventory management and offshoring of manufacturing? Do you see any movement to onshoring to try to cut down distribution disruptions?
Totally. Yeah, that's you guys are hitting on really good all the consequences of this pandemic, and that's certainly one of them. We're seeing that. The theme is just-in-time inventory to just-in-case inventory, right? And that's the mindset shift that's going on. So that's going to give some legs to GDP as well. That as you reshore that, as you adjust your thinking about inventory, that adds to production, that adds to GDP. It's slow. It's a slower process, but we are seeing, I'll call it, decoupling of the globalization, maybe with decoupling of China. It's eroding. It's not a tidal wave, but it's eroding. And you're seeing it, like just the movements today, what the Chinese government's done with Tencent and a number of their technology companies. We're creating some barriers, creating some walls, and I think that reshoring is going to mean some higher levels of domestic production that way, and higher levels of inventory than we certainly have today, for sure. Sure, Chris.
What are you seeing in your forecast of wage pressure for the average worker?
Yeah, this is a tough audience. You guys have all the hard questions. It's complicated, and it depends kind of on, I'll call it pay grade. The bottom end of the scale has been disrupted, right? Because of the federal unemployment assistance that's effectively making it the minimum wage $15 an hour. And as that goes away, how much of that will, I don't know. I think we're seeing some decent wage pressure because there is that labor shortage, and to be able to attract people back into those roles, I think that's going to be persistent. At the higher wage levels, it's a bit of a different story. Having a lot of conversations about remote work and what that might mean to compensation and things like that. So that overall employment cost index has been pretty well behaved for now, but I think that's we'll see in the fall and the coming quarters.
What about
Sure.
the federal eviction notice expiring? Does that dampen any of the growth, or does it impact the unemployment in any way, or is it?
I think that's something. It's a good question. I don't. From an unemployment perspective, I don't think it'll affect the unemployment rate. Either the way that's determined and the way that it is what it is right now. And if you're in a foreclosure situation, a potential eviction situation, I imagine you don't have a job. So that's already in the numbers, so to speak. What it means in terms of I think there's. It's kind of hard to tell, what's going to happen here. I think it's going to put more money probably in landlords' pockets. have that balance between lessor and lessee. It's obviously in favor of the lessor. So I think it's one of these, I'll call them structural imbalances that we created that we got to work down at some point. I think it's as hard as unempathetic as that sounds. It's probably something we need to work down in time, and it's going to be hard to watch. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Just have one quick question. Do you see any impact to lending and credit availability coming? When you look at the quantitative easing, and every time they try and pull that back, it affects the market. And now there's this new term, reverse quantitative easing, where the banks are actually giving money out to the Fed and they're tightening up on their lending. Do you see that being a big factor?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you talk about distortions, right? We're paying people not to work, and we're paying the banks not to lend. That doesn't make a lot of sense, So I think that we're not really seeing it impact the availability of credit at all. There's a lot of money out there, and prices are very, very firm, spreads very tight. As the Fed tries to take away, as they start removing the punch bowl, I think the private sector will step up. There'll be plenty of demand for product. Yeah. Well, very good. You've been very, very, very kind to have me. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Bill. And what a great way to end a great day and a half of educational sessions. It's the professor, I tell you what, I could listen to him for hours. I mean, just great information. I hope, just as in closing, just a couple things, and I'm looking around to see where he is. Is Ron here? Go figure. Okay. So, David, I don't know if you hit on this yesterday. I know you hit it on yesterday afternoon, but I just, maybe for the broader group, I just want to let everybody know that Ron Gallagher, this will be his last annual convention. So Ron's announced his retirement effective end of June. So I think Ron's done a great job taking PAMIC to the next level. We're going to work hard to find a replacement for him that will keep the momentum that Ron has started. But I can't believe he stepped out. But I want to thank him for everything. I mean, he still has 8-9 months left, but this will be his very last convention. So, if your time to get together and see Ron in person is at the convention, I try to grab him before you leave today. There he is, Ron. I was talking about you. Ron, I was sharing with the broader group here your announced retirement plans for end of June. So, Ron, thank you so much for making this convention a big success. Thanks for everything you've done. I know you're not done yet. You're still with us till June, but thanks so much. And for many people here, this may be the last time they see you in person. So, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. And I also see Brittany in the back. Thank you so much for making this a success. So, any last minute housekeeping items that I need to? Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a safe trip back home.